You're listening to the Electronic Media Collective Podcast Network. Yeah, it's a mouthful. For more great shows like the one you're about to enjoy, visit electronicmediacollective.com. And now, our feature presentation.
Greetings, listener. We don't have a regular episode, so we decided to release this super fan edit for you loyal listeners. It's the total uncut run of our Star Wars discussion. The only difference between this and the 2 episodes is we only have Star Wars stuff. No mail or what you're watching, just nothing but Star Wars. So kick back and travel back to a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, and welcome to the Middle Age Movie Reviews Podcast. 3 guys asking, who's the more foolish? The fool on the microphones or the fool who follows us? My name is Tim, and my podcasting partners are...
Mandalorian Matt.
And sitting in for Joey while he's on sabbatical from the YouTube channel Dungeon Master Elite, it's...
Rick.
All right, Rick, tell us what's on the holocron tonight.
Well, today we've got a great film to discuss. And it's a 1987 Mel Brooks film starring Bill Pullman, John Candy, and Rick Moranis. One of my all-time favorites. And if you guessed that we are discussing how the main villain is your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate, or how now you see the evil always triumphs because good is dumb, then you guessed right, because we will be taking a look at Spaceballs.
No, I don't think that's right.
Oh, right. Actually, we're looking at Star Wars, which I like to refer to the retitled name, Star Wars A New Hope, Episode 4. And it came out in 1977, starring Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher. And the film was a George Lucas creation, but directed by none other than Steven Spielberg.
I don't think that's right. I think it was directed by George Lucas.
I'm sorry. Yes, it was. My bad.
You had one job, man.
One job!
All right. Well, for all of our wonderful listeners, you may or may not know this, but Tim is our official Star Wars fan. So I'm going to ask him, Tim, when was the first time you saw Star Wars?
Matt, I seen Star Wars at probably the perfect age. I was a tender 7-year-old child who was driven out to a drive-in theater by his father to watch what he said was going to be a completely awesome film, and that was an understatement. It was probably the greatest thing my little mind had ever seen, ever. And I've always appreciated the Toy Story movies because I feel like my life paralleled that, just like the boy in that movie, where once I got home, the cowboys and Indians hit the garbage can, and my life became nothing but Star Wars. Everything is Star Wars. So yes, that was the first time I watched it. Was in a drive-in theater in 1977.
So then you would say that it's a lot like the Bill Murray classic, Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when I heard that on Saturday Night Live, I liked that so much I used to sing it all the time as well.
How about you, Rick? When was the first time that you saw Star Wars?
I'll be honest, I really have no idea. I do not know when I first watched A New Hope. The first time I ever remember the Star Wars universe would have been around the time when, actually after Episode 6 came out, because I remember getting, those little action figures and stuff like that when the merchandising for Episode 6 was going on. So it was definitely after Episode 6 came out, and I remember that the most. But I cannot put my finger on when exactly I would have watched A New Hope.
Gotcha.
All right, man, how about you?
Well, Star Wars, for me, was always seen on the small screen. I was born 1 year after the movie came out, so I never had the opportunity to see it on the big screen until 1996. But that's a different story. But I remember seeing Empire Strikes Back first on VHS at home on the small screen because my dad wanted us to see it before we went to go see Return of the Jedi in our local theater. It wasn't the cool drive-in. It was the air-conditioned regular movie theater with 5.1 digital. No, it wasn't digital surround yet, but we had, the high fidelic sound of the 1980s blasting in our ears as we sat in this theater to watch Return of the Jedi. And I even remember that I had the Return of the Jedi novelization graphic novel that I got to read before the movie, but my dad wouldn't let me read the last 3 pages because he didn't want to spoil the movie for me. But yeah, so the small screen, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, small screen, Return of the Jedi, the big screen.
That's
All
cool.
right.
That's cool.
All right. Well, before we dive into the synopsis, I just wanted to kind of pick Tim and Rick's brains about Star Wars. So what do you guys initially thought of for the opening sequence, the big crawl? What was your first opinions, the feel you got when you first seen that 20th Century Fox logo? I just kind of like to get an idea before we dive into the story. But the whole Star Wars movie is almost like it's like a party on the screen. And I just want to know, what was your first thoughts when you saw that 20th Century Fox logo and that initial crawl?
Look, I have to go ahead and say something, man. For years, I mean years, like Star Wars was so impactful. Like I enjoyed it so much that whenever actually I would see the 20th Century Fox logo on other movies, I actually remember having all the way up until probably I was 20. I remember having like this really good feeling about what I was about to watch because of Star Wars. Like I almost was like, "Oh, is this Star Wars?" Like cuz back in the day, people watched TV and you never knew what you were going to watch. Like movie would come on to your regular, broadcast television, and unless you were looking at the TV guide, you had no idea what the movie was coming up. You just saw 20th Century Fox or Paramount Pictures or something like that. And whenever I'd see that logo, that like opening cut, I would always be like, "Oh, dang, this is going to be awesome." Like for the longest time. That's how impactful that this movie was on me.
What about you, Tim? What was that for you?
Well, I'd have to say in the beginning, it was a whole lot of nothing. Because you got to remember, I'm there at the very, very beginning. So we had no expectations. There was no, like, I've already seen Star Wars. I went to see Empire and I know what I'm about to see is awesome. So the logo really meant nothing in the 20th century, at the beginning, and that whole kind of, song that it plays as it comes on, the dun, 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 and the crawl. Probably as a kid, you're like, "Oh my god, I gotta read." I mean, you're just like, "Oh man," like, "Dad, you said this was gonna be cool, and now what? I gotta read? Like, I could have just done homework tonight." So yeah, I think we weren't even paying attention yet. It didn't grip our attention until you see those couple of planets and you start to hear that ship and it starts to come across the screen. That's where
Yeah.
it gripped us. That was the first moment. But I will say, after that, I have to agree with Rick. Every time you heard that 20th Century Fox, song come up and you seen that logo, you just instantly associated it with something that you love, and it just puts you in a good state of mind. I wonder how many movies benefited from that, like people who went in and
Hmm.
might have been feeling like mediocre about it, and then that came up, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be so good. And the movie was so much better than it probably should have been just because of that feeling you had from watching Star Wars. And I felt that way ever since then, watching every one of the movies until I got to the last couple, but we won't go there until I got to the Disney era. And
Yeah.
then it kind of killed the feeling for me. But up till that point, every time you heard that, I agree with Rick. You were just like, oh, this is going to be something good. I'm so happy inside,
Hmm.
Absolutely.
this is going to be a 3 for 3 because I associated the 20th century logo, the 20th century sound effects with Star Wars. Anytime I watched a movie after that, all I could think about would be Star Wars. So much to the fact that when the X-Men came out, now, whereas Tim is a huge Star Wars fan, I'm a huge comic book fan. And when I first saw the X-Men on the silver screen and seeing that 20th Century Fox logo on it, I was immediately thrown back to Star Wars, and I knew right off the bat that I'm gonna enjoy this movie. But yeah, so it's definitely ingrained that 20th Century Fox logo, 20th Century Fox sound is key to Star Wars for me, just like John Williams is key to the Star Wars franchise. But we'll get more into the music later. So, but I just wanted to bring that up first. I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were on that 20th Century crawl and 20th Century logo, the initial crawl. So we'll go ahead and we'll dive into the story synopsis about Star Wars. For those of you who have never ever seen the original Star Wars, here's the synopsis. When a young boy,
hang on, Matt. I can't just let you read this, just normally. I much like all the rest of them. And this evening, I was gonna just have you read it as if you were an Imperial officer down in the detention level, having been brought, somebody that you despise. But I've changed my mind. I think where I'd like to go with this, just for fun, as I think I'd like you to read it this evening as William Shatner, who is pissed because we are covering Star Wars and not Star Trek this evening. Go!
You mean that there is not a single Star Trek movie in the book that we have been reading? How is that possible, man? Fine. I will cover your Star Wars. When a young farm boy on a distant planet obtains a set of droids, he quickly learns that they are key figures in a rebellion to overthrow the current dictatorship that runs the galaxy. Added by an aged wizard, a smuggling scoundrel, and his hairy partner, the farm boy must travel across the galaxy to deliver the droids to the rebellion. Along the way, the four run into the Empire's lead fixer for all the dictator's problems and a great big space station that can change the face of the galaxy forever. The farm boy must also rescue the princess that started the whole journey from said space station. Will this hero save the day? Will the space station be the death of many planets and stars?
All right. Very nice.
Very nice.
Very
man.
nice.
Very well done.
Hey, you know what? I was thinking about this, right? Now, I don't know. This is just a thought of mine. But if there really is someone who hasn't seen Star Wars and they're watching this, like, I feel like the entire, like, the whole, like, 3 trilogies are probably going to get spoiled.
Quite possibly. But maybe we're going to make it so enticing that they're like, I've got to see what these guys are talking about because this movie sounds amazing. And I think to start that, we should go back and talk a little bit about the crawl. I mean, what did you guys think of the crawl? I think it's a pretty cool concept, even though it's obvious that George Lucas lifted it from Flash Gordon, because if you've ever seen all the Flash Gordon movies, it starts like that. But I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool. I like that it sets up the movie in a without getting too deep. What were you guys' initial thoughts on that?
Well, if I could go first, Rick.
Yep.
So what I always thought was neat about the opening crawl, and I only learned this like several years later when I was actually watching some of those classic Flash Gordon serials, was learning that George Lucas grew up watching the classic, science fiction serials in the movie theater, and that this whole crawl was like an homage to that. Once I learned that, I thought about how cool was that. I mean, on top of the fact that they kind of gives you a lead into the story. It gives you like the backstory, kind of where we're at now. It makes you feel like you're in the middle of this built-in universe. You're falling right in the middle of of a story, similar to like the first time you buy a comic book. You know, everybody's comic book, like back then, if you got like Amazing Spider-Man 237 and you flipped it open, you had like the story so far kind of thing on the first page. And that's kind of what it felt like for me, was just being thrown into this universe, kind of getting a, hey, here's where we're at kind of thing. And then boom, right into the action. What about you, Rick?
So I got two things. First thing, I do like it. Whenever I watch any of these movies with my wife, it's like this thing where one of us, gets to read the narration as far as to, like, obviously what you're saying, like the backstory, a little bit of the exposition and stuff like that. And it's kind of like fun, you know what I mean? Obviously,
Yes.
it's not something to be appropriate in the theater, to be reading out loud and stuff. But nonetheless, at home, it's cool, it's fun. However, like doing the research for this, and I mentioned this to Tim the other day, I'm gonna go ahead and crash this party for some people, I think. If they didn't know, George Lucas had actually designed this story with a silent movie in mind. So this is a device used that would attribute to the workings of a plot in a silent movie. So like you have to use text in order to get certain plot points across. And the only other piece that he wanted to add besides text to get the story across was obviously your special effects, but music. So super kudos to John Williams with all this. But if you notice that the music really does carry everything along, starting at the very beginning, it really carries everything along. And that's my take on The Crawl, and then moving into the rest of the film.
Well, and go along with your music comment. When he talked to Williams about this, he said, "Look, I want everything to be seamless. So when we go from the 20th Century Fox intro to this movie, I want the music even in that to be seamless." So John Williams listened to that and wrote it in the same key. So the beginning music we have just transitions very naturally, so it all flows together, which I thought was a good move. And the second thing I love about The Crawl is it kind of sets us up in a very George Lucas kind of way, like a fairy tale. So once upon a time in a land far away is George Lucas's version is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It starts the fairy tale for us, and it's in blue. It's purposely, he colored it blue, that's the fairy tale beginning, and then the yellow starts the story. Here's your story. This is where we're starting. And I thought that was just brilliant, and I don't think a lot of people think about that, but every time you hear that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it's the same as saying once upon a time in blah, 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 blah. So I thought that was really clever for him to do that. The interesting part, though, is that when he originally wrote that first Crawl, it was unwieldy. Yeah, it was, he wrote it, and it was, I think he had like, four sentence paragraphs in there. And it was just, it was crazy long. And so he showed it to some of his friends, and they were like, particularly Brian De Palma was like, dude, it's just a bunch of gibberish. Like, you cannot show this to people. They're not going to understand anything. So actually Brian De Palma helped him rewrite The Crawl into what we know it today, which I pared it down into just the perfect amount of information. And it, I think it brings us right into the movie. So it was really smart of him to bring other people in to say, hey, take a look at this and see what you think.
That's Lucas's MO, though, right? Like, he is brilliant in many ways, but not writing dialogue or text. I pulled this one, a critic, Armand White. He was quoted as saying Lucas achieves the impossible while botching the basics when referring to his dialogue. And even the actors, the stars of the film, when the movie came out and people were talking to them, they were like, yeah, this dialogue is like impossible to read, man. Like, everyone is just, and even Lucas, he called himself the king of wooden dialogue when he accepted an award one time. Crazy
Gotcha.
stuff, man.
And I
Yeah.
think it's awesome though that he knows that that's a weakness and he goes and finds people to help him. You know, I mean, it's otherwise I don't think the movie would be what it'll be. You know, in fact, you guys know what the original title was for the movie?
I don't.
Oh, I think wasn't it Blue Harvest?
No. The original title of this movie was The Adventures of Luke Starkiller as taken from the Journal Wills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. And
Oh
then he
my
pared
God.
it down to, that was the original title. So you can only imagine what that crawl was like, right? I mean, just based on that. And then he's like, maybe I should just call it The Star Wars. And then he's like, nah, I'm just going to call it Star Wars. So that's kind of, So that gives you an idea of where that crawl probably was at back in the day.
I
Well,
mean, I guess that
it's
goes
a
with life. You can't be good at everything.
No.
it's a lot better than Rebel Moon, the Scar Giver, something, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to put a plug in for a dig at Rebel Moon.
That's all right. It's I think it's warranted because it was actually written as a potential Star Wars movie and then reworked. So, I think they wrote that exactly in the same vein as Lucas wrote his original movie.
You know what?
Um,
Before we move on away from the crawl, I have to say that when I was watching it again today, I actually watched it again for this podcast. When I was reading through the lines, I actually read through it twice, and I was actually really jazzed that we've come full circle in the story. You know what I'm saying? Like they're talking about these plans from this that were taken and put to this droid, you know, and I couldn't help but think of, the whole, saga of Rogue One and how everything that happened, like it was some serious stuff when they're talking about, yeah, man, this thing happened, and like without having seen Rogue One, it doesn't quite give the gravity to the outline on this crawl. Like after having seen it, and now you're like, oh yeah, like that totally happened, and that was a serious thing. Like the stakes are high, and I think it almost like gave a more like epic feel to the entire film. Like for myself, when I watched it this time around.
yeah. And I know there's one other last thing I want to talk about with the crawl, and I thought this was kind of neat. So a lot of movies, and I'm not taking. I don't want to just gloss over what you just said. Yes, I do agree that after watching Rogue One and then watching Star Wars, reading that crawl, you do get more of a sense of the epicness, the urgency, the feeling of what these Death Star plans mean. But but on a more production note side, what I thought was really neat about the whole crawl and everything and leading into this is that back in the early times of the filmmaking, like the 30s all the way up to like the 1970s, there was always a credit sequence built into the story or into the show. This is the first time that you see a movie start off and there are no credits for any of the actors, the directors, the cinematographer. All that stuff is at the end of the movie, and I just thought it was neat that that Lucas just drops you right into the story without knowing who anybody is that's making this film.
Yeah,
Well, and that ended up costing Lucas too, like a lot of money. So he got fined $250,000 by the Directors Guild of America for not crediting the director during the beginning of that film. And they did it again to him on Empire. And after that, he was like, I'm done. He tore up his card. He's like, I am no longer part of your guild, because he lost $500,000 over doing that because they were fining him to death. So like that was and he knew it was going to happen the second time. He's like, I don't care.
that's nonsense, man.
I'm just going to pay it and I'm done with you. So yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? But I have to agree with Rick though. Like I think now that I've seen Rogue One, and I've watched this movie since Rogue One, but I don't think I've always read The Crawl. But again, watching it for the podcast, I'm like, well, really paying attention because I want to make sure, I'm paying attention to all the details and stuff. I was like, it really did make that seem so much more important, and and you really understood what it took to get us to this point. Like it's like, wow, some shit really went down for somebody to get these plans. A lot of people died, to get this R2 unit into the hands of the rebellion. So it really did add a lot of gravity to the film as a whole right at the beginning. You know, I was very impressed with that. And the only thing about the crawl that I thought was funny, though, when I read it, and I stopped it and I read it again, was it's the armored space station, which I thought was kind of funny because I'm just thinking, you know, like that's a weird thing to point out that it's an armored space station. So all I can think of is like, you know, them throwing like an asteroid or something at it, just like, you know, hitting Death Star, and all you hear is like ting, ting. So it was just one of those. I don't know why it struck me so funny, but it did. Yeah, I think if we want to have that discussion, we should. We'd have to sit down and talk about The Expanse, because if there's ever a movie that probably has a more realistic idea of how space works, I think it's that show.
Well, to segue back into the story, so we had that crawl, and then we had that awesome pan down from from just space with stars, and then we get the spaceship flying right over the top of the camera. And that, of course, is what we find out is Princess Leia's Corellian ship. How cool was that for an intro? I mean, you're just kind of like sitting there, you see this planet with like these two moons in the distance, you know, this great, you know, I don't know if it was a matte painting. It was this beautiful looking space area, and then all of a sudden this ship just flies right over the top of you as you're sitting in the theater or sitting at on your couch watching this. You get that sense that there is something massive above you. What did you guys think of that whole opening sequence with the starship and then the Star Destroyer right behind it? Right. Yeah, we definitely get the feeling of the archetypes. You know, Darth Vader is, like you said, the man in black, the black hat. If you're watching a classic cowboy movie, unlike, you know, a movie like The Wild Bunch, where you don't know who's the black hats, who's the white hats. This is clearly dictating, you know, who was who right off the bat. And I think before we dive a little further into the story, Tim, what did you think? You know, first time seeing that in the drive-in with the big Star Destroyer flying over the top of you. What kind of impressions did that give you?
Well, that shut up three very rowdy boys in the back of a truck very quickly. Again, like after the reading part where we're like, oh my God, I don't want to have to read. As soon as that came on, you were just transfixed. You're like, holy cow, look at the size. I mean, you see the Tatooine 4 go by. You know, that's the first ship you see, and you're like, that's pretty cool. But then you just see this ship that just keeps going and going and going. It's like, holy cow, like that's crazy. Look how big that thing is. It's just amazing the way it takes forever for it to come across the screen, you know, and then there's a battle going on. Like, and that's what I love is that he just drops you right into the action. There's, you know, you get your little crawl, you get a little bit of the story, what's going on, and you're right into the action instantly, which is something that Lucas took from, you know, from some Japanese films. Actually, it was Akira I think it's Kurosawa.
Yeah, Akira
He would
Kurosawa.
do that. He would do that a lot, like just drop people right in and, you know, hope that they were smart enough to kind of figure out what was going on. So that's something he kind of lifted from those, but to great effect. I mean, it's just amazing to watch the crawl of that ship, and not only as a chase scene, but it's a battle chase scene. There's, you know, you get to see, you know, for the first time, you've seen all those, you know, basically the laser bolts going back and forth, and you're just like, you know, wow, it's just so cool. You've never seen anything like that before. We've seen a lot of hokey sci-fi in our life, but you've never seen anything quite like that. It was just amazing. And after that, you could have heard a pin drop in the back of the truck we were in. I mean, it was just like there was no talking for 2 hours after that. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, you know, if you were William Shatner and you were friends with Jeff Bezos and you got shot into space, then you could do that.
Yeah, that'd be about the way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's like Lucas was making the movie as an event. It was an event in your life to go to the theater or go to the drive-in. You know, you're gonna get sucked into the story. You're gonna have empathy for the heroes. You're gonna want to hate the villains. It was an event, and like you said, Rick, throwing that sound in there, it allowed you to identify with everything, and that's what I thought was phenomenal. With the story, with the way Lucas just thought of filmmaking, and I think that even goes to today with some of his movies.
Well, and I think for me, I actually got to experience the movie twice in a different way. Because the first time I'm at a drive-in theater, giant screen, right, and I'm getting to see all this cool space stuff, robots, stormtroopers, all kinds of stuff. So, again, as a 7-year-old, you didn't get to see a lot of that back, in the 70s. It's just in 1977. Before that, it didn't really exist. But what you didn't get is you didn't get the sound experience because you got that little tinny sounding speaker sitting inside the car that you're listening to this from. So in 1997, when they got re-released into the theater, was the first time I got to experience the true power of the sound. I mean, you got to hear it from home somewhat, but really sitting in a theater, and I think at that point it hit THX. I mean, it was a whole new experience for me because I got what I got to see visually as a 7-year-old. Now I got to hear audibly, like that rumble of that ship coming in, just. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it now it's a whole nother experience because I'm getting to not hear it and feel it because THX is just rattling the whole place if they got it set up right. So you're feeling it like vibrating the chairs and everything. So it kind of got me to experience it twice in two different ways. So it was enjoyable for me in both instances. My buddy can feel the force. That's pretty
Crazy.
impressive. Yeah, but then it came back around. So it basically came out for about 3 weeks, and then it kind of started to peter out. And then after about week 7, word of mouth, got around, and it went back up, and then it stayed up for like I think another, I want to say, 16, 18 weeks or something like that. That's when it really started to take off.
Well, I'm just gonna segue in here real quick with a little thing. So, did you guys remember that TV show, that '70s show?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so when in the story's timeline, when they get to round to when Star Wars is released, um, Eric sees it with his friends. He says it's the most iconic movie he'll ever see, and he tells Red about it, Red Foreman, and of course Red's like, "Oh, shut up, you dumbass." Then he and his wife wind up going to see it, and he's like, "Wow, that dumbass was actually right." And I just thought, yeah, that was pretty much what Star Wars was as a phenomenon. It turned a lot of naysayers around to, holy cow, this is a crazy free flipping movie.
And there's so much good stuff out there. I mean, there's the original 3 movies. There's the books that came after, which some are not good, but some are excellent. Like if you're a reader, go check out the Thrawn trilogy, the original one. You will not be disappointed by Timothy Zahn. It's excellent. There's the comic book releases. Marvel did a really good job with releasing comics with it. There's the video games. There's just untold amount of stuff out there that you can check out. Then TV series that came later, like the Clone Wars, Bad Batch, and Rebels, all very excellent. The original, the first 3 prequels, a lot of people give them a lot of static, but I always liked them. I always thought, they're not as good as the first 3. They do lack some things in certain areas, but they're still very well done. Before Disney gets a hold of it, all the material that's out there, and there's a role playing game that actually Rick and I played together. So Star Wars, D6 by West End Games that they no longer make. It's not in print, but if you can find it, it's a great game. And those were the Bible. Like if you want to know anything about Star Wars, you went and you read those books. If you were an author and you're going to write about Star Wars, you went and you read those books because it told you everything you needed to know about the Star Wars universe and what you could and could not write about and how the timelines work. So they were basically the Bible, via LucasArts. So
Right.
just great amount of material and stuff out there for you to watch.
By all means.
Absolutely. Matt, I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, you mean outside of the original 3 or the original movies? Okay. Sorry, when you said fanfic, I'm like, well, I don't read fanfic because that's just all like slashy crap, right? No, you mean outside of. Okay. Um, Honestly, for me, I would have to say it's the current run of the Star Wars comic books that Marvel has been doing since 2017, I want to say. When they got the license back from Dark Horse, I really have enjoyed what they were writing there with Jason Aaron. The second one that I think I like the most is probably Rebels, because that kind of like helps link the first 3 movies to the episodes 4, 5, and 6. And I think the third thing would probably be the original Timothy Zahn trilogy. Why can't I think of it? It was the Thrawn trilogy, but it had a different name then. It wasn't Dark Horizons. Yes, Heir to the Empire.
That's the first book. So it's Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising. Yeah.
Yeah. Those three books I really enjoyed because that's all I had after Return of the Jedi. You know, they didn't have any other movies or television series, nothing else. You had the books, and those were the ones that got me into reading Star Wars. But what about you, Tim?
Again, I'm going to reiterate the same thing. The Timothy Zahn series, by far, that was what really revitalized Star Wars after it basically kind of got its death keel in 1985. You know, when everybody was kind of done with it, and everybody thought Star Wars was pretty much a dead entity. When he wrote those books, he basically put Star Wars back on the map, and really made people appreciate, you know, the Star Wars universe, and take an interest and go, I think there are more stories, you know, to this universe, and I want to know more. So those are a must read. If you're a reader, those are a must read. If you're never going to read any other Star Wars books, those are the three. I can't say it enough. I enjoyed reading the original Marvel comics. I don't remember if the stories were all that good, but as a kid, it allowed you to go further into the Star Wars universe than you could with just the couple of movies and not a VHS tape player in sight for years to come. So it was nice to have those to you know, keep experiencing Star Wars as a child. And then after that, I enjoy perusing the West End Games books. As a whole, I mean, it's just so much information in there when you want to know something. Just flipping around on those and reading about stuff, you're like, oh, I never even thought about this, or oh, look all the detail they have about, you know, this little nichey thing over here about the Empire or whatever. So it's not like really reading a story, but it's just such a good reference, you know, source of data that you're just going to enjoy reading it. So those would be my picks. That's pretty broad, I know, but there you go.
Nice.
How about you? How about you, Ray?
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for
Yeah.
addressing the elephant in the room.
Yeah. I concur. Those, you know, those are definitely where I would put it in the legends category. Like, yeah, if Star Wars was in a parallel universe, maybe this stuff would happen. But yeah. But I mean, but if you want to talk about good fan films, the two best ones I've ever seen, just and now that you've thrown that out there, is there was one called Troops that was made with stormtroopers as if they were cops, and you can find it on YouTube. It's great to watch. And then there's a guy called, I'm gonna get the last name wrong, Darth Anglius, I think. He's on YouTube as well, and he's actually taking the Heir to the Empire book and he's making it chapter by chapter with computer graphics. And
wow.
if there was ever to be a Star Wars #7, that is what you should go watch. That is Star Wars Episode 7. He's got half of it done. So there's about an hour. You can watch the whole thing, the first half of it. I think he's gotten past that, but it's out there, and the graphics get better little by little, but the story is awesome, and he's very true to the book. So definitely worth, if you don't want to go read the books, you can go watch the first half of the first book on YouTube. So go check it
Nice.
out.
You know, we'll put that in our show notes over at the Man Reviews podcast blogspot.blogspot.com blogger blog. Then go check our show notes or Facebook.
You introduced me to that, and those are very funny. No, I've never seen that
I don't
one,
think so, no.
but I know what I'm doing
Nice.
after the podcast.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back into the story since we've kind of gone off and told about some of the great stuff in the realm of Star Wars. But you know, we're 46 minutes into this podcast and we've only gotten past the Star Destroyer showing up on the screen. So we zoom into the Corellian cruiser and we see three droids walking through this rather, again, acoustically phenomenal sound of a ship being attacked, and we see three droids, but yet only two of them are key to the whole story. I've always wondered what happened to that third droid, that third C-3PO looking character. Anyone else get an idea as to what happened to that person?
Spice Mines a Kessel.
Okay. So then after we see the three droids, which eventually gets knocked down to two, we get the intro to probably the most known villain in all the world. He is so well known that actually he is a gargoyle on a church in Notre Dame. In I want to say Notre Dame. Or no, it was Harvard. Harvard has a bust of Darth Vader's face on the church as a gargoyle because they asked the students who is the most villainous person you could think of, and they mentioned Darth Vader. And how cool of an intro do we get with like this door blowing open, all these like laser shots, and then
How did that go
Rick,
again,
you've
Matt?
got the sound, man.
I want to hear those laser bolts again. There you go.
um,
I mean, that's truly amazing. When you see Darth Vader for the first time, you're just like, holy cow, who is this guy? I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, you just know, this is the baddest ass in the galaxy. You know, what I mean, there's just hands down. I mean, let's face it. There's a lot of bad characters in the world, but nothing holds a candle to Vader. I mean, just nothing. And it's pretty. You see those stormtroopers come out, they kind of flank him, and then he comes through that door. Truly impressive. Well, that is Vader's 501st. Those are the elite creme de la creme stormtroopers.
Yeah, and it is funny because in the first movie, I think when they first did the credits, he wasn't even credited as the voice of Darth Vader. It wasn't until later on that he got the credit.
Yeah, and it pissed off David Prowse a lot because the guy who actually is in the Vader suit, like he's doing the dialogue throughout the whole movie, and you can go around looking, and there's some people that say he knew that he wasn't going to be the voice, and there's people that say that he didn't know he's going to be the voice, but I guess he had some kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, a hickish English accent. So some kind of country English accent. And then Lucas was like, this is not going to work. So they decided to go with James Earl Jones and put him above it. And I'll say years later, when I've seen him at conventions, he was very angry. He's a very angry man because that would then add to the, injury to insult. When they unmasked Vader in Jedi, it's not his face. So the guy just got screwed all the way around. So he was very, very mad about it. And rumor has it that for that reason, a lot of times he would let secrets go about like the new movies coming out and stuff. So eventually he got blacklisted and was no longer allowed to come to any of these Star Wars conventions.
And if you ever get a chance to get if you ever buy something that has his autograph on it, you will always notice that it says David Prowse is Darth Vader.
Yes, I have at least 2 figures signed exactly that way.
Yeah, I've got a couple books in that way, and you can even hear, again with the whole sound, you can hear the rebel soldiers' lyrics just crack under his hand.
I do find it interesting that Darth Vader, the baddest Jedi in the galaxy, really only has one tool in his managerial toolbox, and that's just choking the shit out of anybody that pisses him off. Yeah, Rebel doesn't want to give you information, choke him. Guy sits there and gives you some shit while you're at a conference or at a meeting, choke him. So it's like,
yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think they're both impressive. I mean, if you can choke somebody from distance, that's pretty cool. But if you can pick somebody up with one hand and hold them up off the ground while you're questioning them, that's equally cool. But it's still kind of the same tool out of the toolbox,
Yeah.
Well, and that's right. where Lucas shines. So he may not get dialogue quite right, but he's got it where it counts in the details. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't leave. There's not a lot of plot holes. When you get to the end of these movies, you're not like, oh man, there were so many plot holes, or they didn't really answer this, or they left this just kind of hanging. No, it's all tidied up and good to go.
It's I'm gonna go back to a comment from Joey on a previous podcast, but this story is definitely a butt story. Like Vader shows up to the ship, but Princess Leia smuggles away the plans on the droid. The droids get away, but Darth Vader sends down a patrol to try to secure the plans. It's definitely leads everything in from beat to beat to beat, not and then. Where that's where the and thens is where you get your plot holes. With the butts, you actually get a better story, a better detail into how the story progresses.
Now, do you feel maybe there was a little bit more ends in the prequels, or do you think it? Like,
yeah,
I feel
was to say with the prequels, there was definitely more and thens than there were butts.
Yeah. I think the three things that turns the people off about the prequels that's missing from these originals is that you instead of getting a but, you're getting more of a but, and then, so it's a little bit more, follows that formula than, the good formula of but this happened, but this happened, but this happened. I think the second thing is that the dialogue was a little sterile. Like just the feel of that was a lot more sterile than the original one.
Hmm.
Because what I mean by that is I think what makes this movie so enduring. I watched it this time around, and it's the camaraderie between the characters. There's some warmth there. There's some genuine friendship. There's comments that they make. They're very excited, very supportive of each other. There's those little comments that friends make to each other that they make in this movie that you don't get in the prequels. Like the dynamic between Han, Luke, and Leia in this movie is not the same dynamic that you get between like Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and young Anakin, or even,
Right.
those, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and the Jedi Council, or later Anakin and Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council. It's just everything's much more sterile and proper. Where in this one, it's a bunch of roguish kids just trying to figure their way through this mess that they're in, and in doing so, they become closer, friends with each other as it goes along, and they support and help each other through these impossible situations.
Okay, Kramer.
Yes,
Eh,
yes.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I hate Tatooine. Let me tell you why. Sand. It's just sand everywhere. No, not quite like that, but yeah.
Um, so we talked about the plans getting away, about them not firing on the escape pod, which I thought, yeah, that would be a 5-minute movie right there. Boom, just why didn't they just shoot? Even if the gunner was like somebody who's like, hey, I need some target practice, or nobody's in there, I'm gonna blow it away. What the heck? Um, but what I always thought was neat is that there are so many things within this story that kind of makes you think, okay, what's guiding the story? Is it coincidence? Is it the Force? Because there are so many things that if this happened, then that could have then how would this turn out, you know? Case in point, so they wind up going to Tatooine to get, Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Obi-Wan's there. We find out many, many years later that he's there watching over Luke Skywalker, and for reasons that I'm gonna keep quiet because you don't want to ruin the spoil of the entire series, right? You don't want to be Homer Simpson walking out of Empire going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe."
Right. I don't think it's. I think it's fine. I think we can. We can leave that mystery there for the three people left on the planet that haven't seen it.
Yeah. So, but it's like, is it pure? Is it purely coincidence that all these things are happening, or is it part of some giant destiny? And that's what always kind of blew my mind with this story, you know.
Well, Matthew, the Force binds us and guides us. That's because Obi-Wan's just like, okay, this is it. This is my chance to get off this crappy ass backwater planet. I'm going to convince the boy to go with me to Alderaan, and I don't have to sit in this shithole anymore. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's common knowledge though, because Owen and Beru know him because Anakin was related and Obi-Wan knew him through Anakin. So that's why they know who Obi-Wan is. But I don't think everybody knows that he's there. I think it just they're like, oh,
He's
yeah,
the
that's that crazy wizard living out in the desert. You just stay away from that guy. He's high on he licks toads and stuff. Stay away
It's
from him.
it's a local celebrity. It would be like a local celebrity versus, somebody that, oh hey, we're going from Tatooine to Corellia, and we heard about this guy, Old Ben. No, he's not known. Old Ben is not known throughout the galaxy. He's just known in this small little area on Tatooine. So, but that's according to my headcanon. So we kind of skipped over a few things in the storyline, and I just kind of want to back up a little bit and brush up with the whole fact that the droids land on Tatooine, and after a small argument, like they're an old married couple, they each separate and walk off into two completely different directions, and somehow manage to get grabbed by the same set of Jawas.
Yes. So when I watched this, I watched the absolute original copy of this. I have a copy of the unspecial edition, the non-special edition, if you will, unedited, untouched, original theatrical version. So I watched that for this podcast. It is in there. So, well, and the other thing I like is that not only are the robots treated poorly, but they treat each other kind of poorly. I mean, if you think about it, R2D2 and C3PO are always bickering back and forth. In fact, R2D2 originally was supposed to speak English, and he was going to kind of be an asshole. He's always saying snide comments to C3PO, and then later, Lucas had the idea that maybe it'd be funnier if I just had him do these beeps and boops and stuff, and just have C3PO do one side of the conversation, which makes it even more interesting. But you always hear him reacting to things that R2's saying to him, and R2's not nice to C3PO in any way, shape, or form. So I thought that was interesting, and I guess it goes hand in hand because the actual two actors that play them too, Anthony Daniels and Kenny Baker, hated each other. Just hated each other. Like they did not like it. Kenny Baker said that he was just kind of an asshole because he was always calling them like little man and things like that. And I guess even there was one time they were supposed to go out on a promo, and Kenny Baker's like, well, it depends if his lordship is going to, the one with the golden balls is going to be with us. If he is, count me out. So, yeah. So I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic that they don't like each other on screen or off screen. So, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting that R2 has enough, personality that he's always telling C3PO off. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was Jimmy Smith's idea. I don't know. It's been a while since I sat down and watched episode 3.
Yeah, they don't want them being able to give away where the babies are at. So I think they're like, wipe these droids' minds, because they're retaining the entire story. Because I mean, honestly, this story is told through the eyes of R2D2 and C3PO. If you think about it, they're in all the movies.
Yeah.
And they start this movie and they end this movie. It's really a tale of them telling the story, even though you don't really realize that's kind of how it's going. It's one of those kind of, if you don't really think about it, you don't really know it's happening, but that's really what it is. It's the two of them kind of telling the story. And you get some of that during Jedi when C3PO is reenacting some of the story for the Ewoks. And so R2D2 had all that knowledge, and C3PO from the first 3. In fact, there's a point in the Clone Wars cartoon where, R2D2 gets lost because Anakin gets shot up and he loses a starfighter. And then he has to tell Obi-Wan, he's like, hey, I lost R2. He's like, oh, it's no big deal. He goes, well, I've never wiped his memory. He's like, what? He's like, what the hell, dude? You don't let a droid go on like that forever. He's got all this information about everything we do. And he's like, well, yeah, it comes in handy sometimes. He's like, no, that's not how we do it, dumbass, for situations like this. So, so yeah.
Nice. So they get picked up by the droids. Or they picked up the droids. The Jawas kind of help. They definitely help, like you said, expand the world building for this. I mean, you get the idea that these Jawas are like junk collectors, and they're always trying to sell to the local people. I kind of analogize them towards like somebody who steals a car and cuts it up and sells it for parts.
They're chop shops on wheels.
Exactly, yeah, they're chop shops on wheels. I mean, because they're selling these droids to Uncle Owen at his moisture farm, and that's where we again get another coincidence thing that had they not bought C3PO and had the red droids motivator blown up, then R2 and C3PO wouldn't have continued through the story. They would have gone separate ways.
Poor R5D4.
Yeah. And there is one editing gaffe that I noticed in this particular scene when they're buying the droids. So there's a scene after the red 5's or R5's head blows off. They cut back to R2, and there's the red droid right next to R2. And I'm like, oh, hey, there's a little bit of the red droid. So definitely a little editing gaffe in there.
Well, and there's Luke refers to him as an R2 unit instead of an R5 unit as well. So there's that. That's the only time I've ever picked up on anything in the script wrong was when, and I'm sure there's more, but is when he's like, hey, this R2 unit's got a blow motivator on. He's like, oh, how about the other one? And it's like, dude, that's an R5 unit. Come on. You're acting in the show. Be professional.
Well, yeah, he's just a dumb farm boy living on a backward planet. I mean, how is he going to know the difference between, a Samsung S3 and an Apple iPhone 4?
Right.
No, I have my little droid. My little droid can do it for me.
Yeah, right. Well, and I'm gonna say, going along the same lines too, as him not knowing about that not being R2 unit is, when everybody's like, "Well, you spent 3 movies with R2D2. How can you not know it's him?" How many R2 units that look like R2D2 that are painted the same? I mean, the odds of that being the exact same R2 from Anakin, from when he was, back in the Clone Wars, is astronomical. So I can see where it's like, I don't remember owning a droid, but although you would think he'd be like, but I do remember my friend having one. But yeah,
Right.
that's why you handle it like Uncle Owen. You just like, you never mind to get out there and work on those moisture, vaporize or whatever. So that's all you got to worry about.
And of course, it's technically he didn't lie because I mean he said he never. Okay, like tall nerd thing. He never did say that he owned a droid. Oh, yeah, exactly. and, and of course, we're now at the point where we're introduced to Luke Skywalker, the farm boy that this whole story is about. Yeah, the first he's yeah, exactly. Yeah, I say he goes on the hero's journey. What was it? Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote about the hero's journey, where you start off as like a 2-dimensional character, and as you go through all these tasks and these adventures, you become more of a 3-dimensional character, somebody that the reader or the listener or the watcher can now associate with them. And that's part one, square one of any good storytelling. And of course, we get to see Luke in his raw form.
Well, and that's how kids act when you throw a wrench into their plans. They're like, I was gonna go blah blah blah. They get all whiny like that. It actually is pretty true to form, I think.
Yeah.
We all hate it because when you hear it, you're like, son of a bitch, that makes me mad because it reminds me of, like it reminds you of every other time you've heard a kid do that. And you're like,
reminds me of my own damn kid.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So then let's see. So yeah, we get introduced to Luke. We get to see what his life is like on the farm. We get to see how much he can be a little annoying, how he's he's got those dreams and aspirations to be something bigger than what he is. He talks to his Uncle Owen about wanting to like put his what do you call it, his application into the academy. I mean, here you see he's a kid that is dreaming about something bigger and better than where he's at. And again, there's the hero shot, which is kind of like I'm gonna go to another franchise and kind of quote something there, but in Galaxy Quest, when Tim Allen is being the hero and he puts his foot up on the rock and he looks off into space all very knowingly, I'm like, Luke is doing the hero shot.
Or the Captain Morgan for product placement. I'm pretty sure if you go to Disney and order the blue milk, you're going to get some rum in it.
Nice. And speaking of Luke and his daydreaming, he's has to do his chores and he's not really thinking about his chores, and all of a sudden he stumbles across the message with Princess Leia. And I thought it was rather funny how quickly he suddenly like falls in love with this beautiful princess. He's like enamored by her, and I'm like, knowing now what I know in the future, it's like, ooh, dude, really?
Well, there's definitely 2 of them on Tatooine.
Yeah, right.
The 2 green ones from the cantina, the twins from the cantina, and they might be a little dirty. And outside of that, there's Aunt Beru and then nobody. So, Luke's like, hey, what's this? She looks soft. Is that a girl? Is that what they look like? I'm ready to go. Let's go find Obi-Wan. Get the hell off this planet. It's like the Jungle Book. He sees the girl. He's in. He's in 100%.
I can feel a presence.
Yeah. I haven't felt in a long time.
Yeah, the whole, well, of course, the whole blowing up the planet shows up later once we get Ben off Tatooine. But yeah, okay. Oh yeah, because there's the orb looking black droid that's kind of like hovering there, and it's got this hypodermic needle sticking out the side of that droid. I can't think of what that droid's name was. Maybe if we had somebody...
It's just interrogation droid.
Okay.
Yeah. So they get super fancy with that one, Matt. But But now that I'm pondering, I want to go back 1 second. Now that I'm pondering this whole thing about Luke getting so excited about that recording, and the one thing I will say is maybe got a little excited too because Princess Leia's not wearing a bra because George Lucas wouldn't allow her to wear one underneath her. There's everything, bras in space. So he's like, oh yeah, all right, yeah. She seems easy. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Dude, I was 7. I wasn't looking at girls yet.
Right.
Yeah, she's very pretty in the face. Right.
Right. Well,
All right, man.
just-
Move us on. All
right. Well, I just want to hang out here just a little bit longer. So kind of a what if multiverse thing. At one point, Jodie Foster was up for the role. Can you guys imagine what Star Wars would be like if it wasn't Carrie Fisher? I mean, think about all the other Star Wars movies. If that was Jodie Foster, would you really see Return of the Jedi the same way?
No. Yeah, well, before Star Wars really came out, I mean, a lot of your TV viewing was, The Mask of Zorro, the Lone Ranger and Tonto. It was Westerns, spaghetti Westerns. The toys of the day for boys were like the Marks, Cowboys, and Indians, the big 12-inch ones, and things like that. So it really was like a lot of your action adventure was in the Old West. It was a big thing. And then Star Wars came out and the whole world's like, we're done with the Old West, man. We're going to space. I mean, that's really kind of how it worked. And that's what Toy Story kind of depicts.
Yeah, he
Right.
was the space version of a gunslinger.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you don't just get that in this movie. I mean, you get the gunslinger in Han Solo. You get the samurai in Darth Vader and in Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, that's what the Jedis are. They're samurai. And so you're getting all the classic different characters in one movie, and that's kind of cool. So
Yeah.
And then I think getting back to the Leia question that man asked, I think it doesn't hurt that Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher had an affair while they were filming this. So there was some chemistry going on there. I don't know how soon and where those were shot, but they had some back end romance going on there. So that probably helped it. But I looked at the other people that were up for that role, and I do think there are 2 that could have pulled it off. Karen Allen, she's from Raiders. I think isn't that the main actress from Raiders?
Yeah.
She auditioned and she would have had about the same look and feel I think that Carrie Fisher would have. So I think she could have done it because she brings that chemistry to the Raiders film with Harrison Ford later. And the other one, which would have been a little rougher, not as pretty, but would have been interesting, Sigourney Weaver actually auditioned for this role. And I can, let's take the alien Sigourney and put her, in Star Wars. Much probably harder character, maybe not quite as cute, but unless she was throwing some Ghostbuster vibes out there. But yeah, there you go. The rest of them after that, you got like Gina Davis, Farrah Fawcett, Melanie Griffith. You got Angelica Houston. There's all kinds of them. I can't see any of the rest of them filling those roles. But I think those 2, yeah, maybe. I think Carrie Allen would have been more true to what we got, and Sigourney would have made it Sigourney's in her own way.
Yeah, honestly, I think that the casting calls were spot on because there's just something about those actors and actresses in the series that beyond the characters themselves, they seem to had a family feel to it. I mean, after doing 3 movies together, they definitely had a bond.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if it wasn't for those 3 people, then you wouldn't have had such a good story to tell or scenes to see.
And the scary part is Lucas didn't even want Harrison Ford at all. Like he wanted, somebody else. And he actually, the people that he offered it to, I can't see any of them. So he actually offered it to James Caan, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Burt Reynolds. And all those guys turned it down. Even later on, Pacino was like, it was mine for the taking, but I just didn't understand the role. Can you see any of those guys as Han Solo?
No.
It would have wrecked that whole character. Bandit in space. That big flaming chicken on the Falcon. We're gonna smuggle some blue milk. Come on, Chewbacca, let's go.
And the Emperor is being played by Jackie Gleason.
Yeah. Vader, remind me when we get home to punch your mama right in the mouth.
Yeah. All right. Well, now that we've gone off on a tangent, let's bring her back around to Luke did. So C-3PO and R2-D2 are basically been cleaned up, and Luke goes off to go eat his dinner after Aunt Beru calls him in, and then R2 managed to be rather devious and escapes. And of course, Luke finds out when he goes back to the garage, all the lights are off, and he hits this little, like, I don't know, a car starter button, one of those key fobs that we have on our cars to see where 3PO is at, and
It buzzes as restraining bolt and forces him to like kind of pop up.
exactly, and it's like, okay, well, you now know that R2's gone, and instead of like immediately going out, he's like, well, we'll get him in the morning.
Deserts are hard to navigate. You don't want to throw a beacon out for everybody to follow.
It's a little bit like Mad Max. You don't want the people to know that you've got a refinery in your backyard, because I mean, water is a key ingredient, and they're moisture farmers. So yes.
Yeah, but okay, let me put it in perspective for you though. So you got Afghanistan that doesn't have a lot to offer anybody in this world. It's just a big pile of sand and rock. And those people need water there. They ain't got nothing to trade. So you're not exactly getting people wanting to, fly in, rail car in, whatever, water to that place, because it's not lucrative for them. And Tatooine's kind of like that. It doesn't offer a lot. There's not, it offers a place for thugs to hide. It's a bad neighborhood. And that's what it is. Essentially, Tatooine is a bad neighborhood where people go to hide out from, the Imperials and whatever other troubles they've got going on. And the local inhabitants don't have a lot of options in order to make money. So if you're the guy producing water, you're probably doing all right for yourself, because nobody is probably shipping you in because it's just not lucrative.
So Tatooine is Detroit.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, that's why Luke's like, hey, should we go get R2? He's like, hell no, we live in a bad neighborhood, dude. We're gonna wait till it's light out.
Man, we just bought that off some Jawas. You don't know where he was stolen from.
We're gonna come out and find our repulsor lifts ripped off of the land speeder, dude.
Yeah.
It's gonna be on blocks. Yeah.
Well, it's like the Mandalorian TV series. How many times was there the joke with, I'm just buying my parts back from you guys. You stole them from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just the fun stuff nobody talks about until you're like, what I was thinking, and everybody's like, I never thought about it, but you're right.
It's all part of the phenomenal world building that Lucas did to help continue the conversation past the movie. And speaking of continuing the story, or the continuing the conversation, Luke next morning goes off on his speeder. It's not on blocks. He actually has all the pieces to it. Takes off, and runs into some sand crawlers, or sorry, some sand people, and those giant banthas. Now, when I first saw this movie and seeing those banthas walking around, now modern day Matt knows that maybe they were just like elephants or some kind of
they were
prop
elephants
or something.
Yep.
But seeing them move around on the screen, that was like what sucked me into again to this whole world building. It's like, where do we find these? Are these real creatures? They don't look like camels. They don't look like elephants. Are these things real? It was a great design for a creature, that just kind of like really really helped tell more of the world and the universe that we're currently living, that the characters are living in.
Well, it's their equivalent of camels.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And it is interesting. Speaking of these animals and the world building, it's crazy that Lucas had such a great ideas that he was able to get it to somebody who could come up with some really cool concept art. And I just want to take a few minutes just to kind of talk about just where some of these archetypes came from. You had C-3PO, who was like this very very much like Metropolis looking droid, and R2 or Darth Vader, he looked very like a samurai warrior. And I think we have a lot to think about with gentleman's name. It just now escapes me. Tim, little help
Ralph
here.
McQuarrie. Ralph
Yes.
McQuarrie.
Yeah, and just his crazy concept ideas that went with this movie. Rick, have you seen the Ralph McQuarrie artwork that was the original concept art for this?
I was gonna say some of my I collect a lot of Star Wars items, as you know, mainly the 3 1/4 inch figures. Been collecting them since '77, and outside of the original toys from '77 to '85, some of my favorite pieces are they actually Hasbro produced a handful of the Ralph McQuarrie concept figures. So it's like the original Darth Vader looks a lot more samurai-esque. The Stormtrooper, and they Stormtroopers originally had in his artwork had shields and lightsabers, so, which I thought was really cool. That's one of my favorite toys of all time. It's got the original R2D2, which looks more like Chopper from Rebels. Got a lot more arms and stuff going on there. C3PO definitely looks a lot more like the droid from Metropolis. Chewbacca looks a little more uh, like Chewbacca with maybe more of a werewolf kind of face to an extent, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it, but very cool toys. I really was happy that they made those. And even the interesting stuff is like you can see the original first Luke Skywalker, and he actually has like a face mask on, like he's in space, and he has to have like a respirator, so it looks kind of like almost like a gas mask that he's wearing with his lightsaber. Leia has a lightsaber in the early sketches, so that's kind of neat. So yeah, very cool. If you enjoy the art, you should check the figures out. They're pretty inexpensive to get, still, I think on eBay.
And if you just want to see his art, he's got like numerous Star Wars art concept books. Um, depending on how much you want to pay, but they do have the Star Wars art of Ralph McQuarrie on Amazon for like $150. But it's beautiful looking books. I mean, they're like in a slipcase. They've got the original, like you said, the original R2D2 on there with like the chopper arms. They've got the Metropolis looking C3PO. It's amazing how he came up with these ideas with Lucas, and they were able to like kind of chisel away and make it into the stuff that we see now in the Star Wars universe. And there's just some phenomenal artwork that they used for this concept.
Well, not only was it important that, it helped bring the Star Wars world to life, but without that Ralph McQuarrie artwork, we'd have never gotten this movie, because Lucas kept getting turned down studio after studio after studio. And finally he's like, maybe I should include some, artwork. So that's when he went and got Ralph McQuarrie to make some of this concept art. And he sent the concept art off with the script treatment to 20th Century Fox. And then once they seen that, they were like, oh, we're sold. So that's what got this movie made, was that artwork. If it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't be having this podcast right now.
And we wouldn't have 9 other films, TV series, and
Yes,
books.
but the podcast most important. That's the most important
Okay.
piece.
Yes, the podcast is most important.
Yeah. I mean, we're really the one that's going to bring this movie to the masses. It's going to be us.
Yes, yeah.
The Mandalorian.
One of right. Well, just to continue on the conversation about art before we dive back into the movie, what I always thought was cool was the original Star Wars movie posters that we got to see on the VHS box covers, and those that always like attracted me to the movies as well. And seeing that original Star Wars movie poster with Luke Skywalker holding up the lightsaber, and Princess Leia is kind of like looking all I would almost say kind of sexy looking with her holding the blaster down. You got R2 and C3PO in the background, and Darth Vader's head just kind of looming over everything. I always thought that was so iconic, and it's like permanently ingrained into this movie for me. And I always thought that this was like what's that? Gosh, I can't think of Boris Vallejo. I always thought that was his poster. But does anyone know like who did the original poster for Star Wars?
You may have just stumped me, Matt. I do not.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Because I mean, it was just yeah, Tom Young. So, but yeah, it's amazing that poster, they used it for like all the publicity stuff. It had all these different iterations, and then the same artist did Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and there's just something about it that just kind of like pops and just it seems very iconic. That was the last of what I had for art. If you guys had anything else you want to chime in on.
Nope, I'm good.
Well, it was well earned. Well, speaking of well earned, so Luke gets into a little trouble with those sand people, and he gets rescued by our good friend, classic wizard, Jedi Knight, Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by the indefatigable, I'm not even going to repronounce that name, played by the phenomenal actor Sir Alec Guinness. This was the first movie I ever saw Alec Guinness in, and so after this movie, anytime I'd see him, I'm like, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, I enjoyed him as Obi-Wan. I mean, I didn't ever know him. I'd seen The Bridge Over the River Kwai. I don't know if I'd seen it at 7 or not, but I've seen it since, and I don't think I ever put it together that was him. But that's the movie that he won an Oscar for previous to doing this film, which was one of the reasons why I know that Lucas wanted, because he wanted the Obi-Wan Kenobi character to have a little gravitas. So that's why he chose him. But originally that wasn't even his first choice, though. He actually wanted this Japanese actor, Toshio Mifune, which I guess was in a bunch of those Kurosawa movies.
Okay.
And he contacted them, but he didn't want to do it. And I guess years later, his daughter said it was basically because he wasn't sure about sci-fi movies. He thought, everything he's ever seen, they were just cheap, and he didn't really want to be associated with that. And he thought it would take away from samurai pride. Although I can't, I can't imagine. I mean, even those movies, those samurai movies, even.
I think I just lost Tim.
No, I'm here. I was trying to decide whether I wanted to jump in on that or not, and I decided I wasn't going to go down that path.
You got the higher ground.
Yes, I have the higher ground. The production value is not there in a lot of those movies, but I guess he had enough pride about what they represented that he didn't want to tarnish that. So that's when he went to, decided to go to England and look for an actor there, and he found, Sir Alec Guinness. So, which
right, is that why a lot of the Japanese movies I watch, they always look like they're angry when they're talking to somebody?
That path only leads to the dark side.
What I thought was kind of neat, and again, this goes back to Alec Guinness's acting as well as Ewan McGregor's. I think in the prequels they did a great job getting Ewan McGregor to play Obi-Wan Kenobi because of how much studying he did of Alec Guinness. The way that Alec Guinness had all these little nuances, like when you first see him and you see him from R2-D2's standpoint, and he takes his robe off or his hood off, and he looks over there and goes, "Oh, hello." The way he delivers that line, the way that he has all these I don't know, key proper, almost posh British dialogue, to then we see Ewan McGregor doing that same stuff, channeling Alec Guinness in his role. That I thought that was really, really neat how, in this particular story, Star Wars, we're first setting everything up, that we get the understanding that this is an older gentleman who's seen a lot of stuff, and he has all these mannerisms that were, in the story-wise, was developed by Ewan McGregor. I think that's one of those really neat cerebral things as you kind of dissect the Star Wars stories.
I was gonna say, I think the Obi-Wan character is the most consistent character throughout all the movies and cartoons. Everybody who's played that character has played it true to form to Alec Guinness. They've studied it, and they've decided that I'm going to make sure that I stay true to that character. I mean, I think Ewan McGregor did a great job, not only on sounding like him, but studying what little he had to study, the mannerisms and things like that. He captured it completely. And I think you watch it and you're like, this is Obi-Wan. He even looks like him all the way through it. And then when you get to the Clone Wars cartoon, although now it's a cartoon animation, so I think they copied Ewan McGregor a lot from the movies, to try to get the character down. But the person who voices that, the voiceover actor, did a phenomenal job too. And I think that's the way you should do it, because that was the thing that pissed me off the most about the Solo movie. And I just screamed at the screen, when I'm watching this thing, because you watch Donald Glover and he's playing Lando, and dude, he nails it. You believe that he is a young Lando Calrissian. He's a young Billy D. Williams. I mean, he nails that character. Same mannerisms, same personalities, same cadences, everything. And then you get Alden what is Erich or however you say Enrich playing Han Solo, fuck that guy. That guy's just like, I'm going to play Han Solo any way I want. I'm going to just play him the way I think he should be played. No, you fucking study Harrison Ford and you play Han Solo the way he's supposed to be played. So I just like, I mean, I like that movie, which most people don't, but I hate his portrayal of Han Solo. It's so not true to form. And I think that,
it's wooden. It's not Harrison Ford.
No, not at all. It's not Han Solo. I mean, it's just not at all. So, and I know I'm going off on a tangent, but fuck that guy. All right.
Sorry, I was reviewing my notes and listening. So, yeah, I agree with you. It is neat to see what different actors will do for a role, for a character. And yeah, I gotta say, I like how Alec Guinness portrays Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the whole fact that we get like this interesting dynamic of teacher and student with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. And at first, Luke is a whiny kid who has dreams and aspirations, but he kind of holds off on following under Obi-Wan's tutelage. I mean, we get Obi-Wan's able to get the message out of R2D2, and immediately he's, like you had said earlier, he wants to go on this adventure. He says, "You should come with me." He's tempting Luke, and knowing now, you kind of get the idea that, well, maybe he was tempting Luke because he knew that Luke was destined for greater things, and it's just so then Luke agrees to take Ben to Anchorhead. He says that he can't go with them, and then they come across some disturbing scene. They come across the Sandcrawler after it's been destroyed by what they first think is sand people. Well, Luke first thinks it's sand people, but Ben steers him to the correct conclusion that it was actually stormtroopers, Imperial stormtroopers, not to be confused with the regular stormtroopers. And then that's when Luke puts 2 and 2 together, it gets 5, and runs over to hops in his land speeder and runs over to his home with Aunt Berin and Uncle Beru are completely incinerated. Now, I kind of suffer from a little bit of a Mandela effect because I don't remember seeing their skeletal remains outside of their home. But when I went back and watched it just recently for the podcast, I'm like, holy cow, there they are. I don't know if it glossed over, if it was added later on.
Yeah, they're in there. It's in the original one. It's just a quick pan, though. You got some smoke that obscures it because Lucas is not trying to, make it too graphic. So there's some things sitting around the entrance. There's the skeletal remains, and if you're looking for it, if you're really paying attention, you're like, oh, there it is. Now I can see it clear as day. Like, holy crap, they burned him to the bone. But otherwise, it's a pretty quick pan, and it's just, if you're paying attention, you kind of see it, but not enough to really focus on it. But it's there in the original. Plus, you got to remember, in the original, it's grainy. I mean, these movies each release, starting in 97, then in Blu-ray and 2011, I think it was, or whatever, and so on. It's getting clearer and clearer, so you're really starting to notice the skeletons, a lot more because of the cleanup of the movie. But originally, it's a little fuzzy there in the background. There's some smoke and stuff, so it's there, but it's not going to traumatize the children by any means. Not like in Episode 3 where Anakin comes up out of that lava river, and you're like, oh God, cover the kid's eyes. Oh my God, I had no idea it was going to get like this. So yeah. My friend made that mistake. He's like, yeah, I brought my kid, and then that scene came, and I was like, oh, I'm a horrible father. I am a horrible father. I was like, he's like, why didn't you warn me? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't think about it. I don't have kids that age. My understanding is that I know. So my understanding of the one that I have in hand, it was filmed from a film reel. So it was somebody put it up on the screen, somebody put a camera, and because they had a reel that somehow didn't get destroyed, and that's how this was produced.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's about as legit to the original as you can get.
I know that for the longest time I watched the original theatrical version on Laserdisc, and it was on 3 sides of a Laserdisc. So it was a 2-disc set, and after After I think the first side was 45 minutes, the second you had to flip it. So there are certain scenes in this movie when I watch it on my Blu-ray steelbook that I'm like waiting for the pause, so I go over to the player and flip it. But I'm like, no, this is Blu-ray. I don't need to flip anything.
It's like, why do I always have to pee here? I don't understand.
Exactly. And the one key phrase that I always know when it was time to get up and change flip the disc was when we pan back to the Death Star, and we're introduced to Grand Moff Tarkin, and we have that wonderful I don't know, office building meeting with all of the admirals, and Grand Moff Tarkin shows up and he's talking to everybody, and he says, "And in one fell swoop, we shall eliminate them all." Every time I hear that, I immediately think, okay, I gotta get up.
And pee. Pee and flip the movie.
Exactly. So, but then, so Luke discovers that, his family's now dead, and he immediately flies back to Ben Kenobi, and like almost like a 180. He's like, "There's nothing left for me here now. I'll go with you." I don't know. Maybe it's just my understanding of characters, but it seems like very quick to suddenly decide to go off with the old wizard.
I don't know. I'll think about it. Like, okay, my entire family just got killed by stormtroopers. They've burned my house down. They burned my crib down. Yeah, they left me with nothing. They've destroyed the entire farm, so I got no way to support myself. I'm pissed at them, and this dude just gave me a laser sword. I'm gonna go kick ass and chew bubble gum.
And I'm all out of bubble gum.
Yeah, and I'm all out of bubble gum. You're willing to
It's-
forgive to let the movie or let the story move on. That's really
Yeah.
what it is.
It's actually again another story, but you're willing, Luke is willing to take him to Anchorhead, but we run into the Jawas being destroyed. Okay, well, you're still planning on taking him to Anchorhead, but you find out Uncle Ben and Aunt Beru are dead. So then that makes him change his mind. For me, I think as from like a character standpoint, I think that, yeah, like you said, from a grief point, it would be a good point to just, okay, that's it. I'm taking revenge on everything. In the more rational mind, I'm still thinking, well, shoot, now my place is destroyed. I gotta, build myself back up. What am I gonna do? Maybe then, yeah. I don't know. From my point of view, I feel like there should have been like at least just one more scene of convincing. But who do I know? Maybe I'm just some heartless old man. Maybe, yeah. So So then Luke decides to join up and help fight the Empire with this crazy old wizard at his side. And he flies off to Mos Eisley. I think there was a cutscene in there as well, where we go back to the Death Star. And then I think that's the spot where they have the meeting in the with the admirals. We learn that the Empire has now abolished the Senate, which we learn nothing about the Senate in the entire original Star Wars movie, but it's not until the prequels that we learn about the Senate and what their role is in this quote empire, which I thought was rather weird that there would be an empire with a Senate, at least in this particular story. Any political thoughts on that, guys? Tim?
Say the question again. I was sorry. I was kind of deep in thought on something else I was going to mention.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault.
The cutscene that goes back to Grand Moff Tarkin coming into the council chambers and to have his meeting with all the admirals, and he mentions about how the Emperor has dissolved the Senate. I thought it was weird that they would have a Senate with an emperor, and we don't get to understand that until the first 3 movies. I just wanted to know what your take was on just this conversation that's more or less about the background of the politics of the Empire versus any kind of movement of the story.
Well, I think they explain it. He's like, oh, the Senate will never put up with this. He's like, it doesn't matter. The Emperor's dissolved the Senate. The last of the old remnants of the old Republic are now gone. So all in one, like one sentence. They basically like, here's, this is why there's a Senate, and now there's not one. Because the
Right.
emperor said, we're done with that. We're not playing that. And he's like, well, how will you control everybody? He's like, the regional governors. Oh, okay, cool. He's like, but what's going to keep him in line? He's like, well, it's this giant armored space station we're sitting in. That's how we're going to. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's I think it's a valuable plot point, and I think a lot of information gets put in there. But I was never too confused by that. I mean, of course, when you watch the first three, now you're like, okay, well, I understand the old Republic, because you're like, well, what's this old Republic thing you're talking about? Because that's really your first introduction to the old Republic. And you're like, oh, there was something before this. It wasn't always just an emperor. What is this all about? But it's just a fleeting moment, and you have to wait years till other books start diving into that. Primarily the West End game stuff, like, really starts to flesh that out for you if you're interested enough to go get it. Otherwise, you got to wait till episode 1 comes out, and you're like, oh, that's the old Republic. Okay. Which is what that whole movie's about. I mean, it's the very slow rise of the emperor destroying the Republic, which I always thought was kind of interesting. I thought it paralleled kind of the whole Germany to me. It always paralleled kind of how Hitler came to power. It's kind of the emperor thing. It's along those same lines. So I always thought that was interesting.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of good information there, and it's very well laid out. Yeah, I was too. I like the setup. I can see when he wrote this out, there's always an argument whether he really planned on it ever just being 3 movies or 6 or 9, that goes back and forth. But, he always said, I went with this movie because I felt like if I did the first one, it would have never gone any farther. And he'd have been right. I mean, if you watched that first one, you'd have been like, this is kind of boring. And they'd never gotten episode 2 off. But going back and watching it, I appreciate the setup. I like getting kind of the history of how the old Republic slowly gets disassembled through this evil plan of the Sith. Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I like to blame No Child Left Behind, but I'm just saying, reading's fundamental, and when a lot of people can't do it these days. That's 7, 8, 9. Yeah, those
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. It's the multiverse. It's the what if of Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. What if
All
we
right.
spent a bunch of money and pissed a bunch of people off? How would it work out for us? Sorry, I digress
Exactly.
though.
Yeah. Well, then to get back to a good story. So we get Luke and Obi-Wan showing up in Mos Eisley, and they come across a checkpoint, and instead of these guys having breathalyzers check to see if anybody's driving under the influence, they're checking for droids. And we get to see the Jedi mind trick for the first time in use. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know how many times I've tried to use the Jedi mind trick on something,
Oh, you're wasting your time. The real magic's when you can move something with your mind. That's where you should be focusing your attention.
I mean, come on. Did you ever get in trouble with the principal and go, this wasn't the report card that you were looking at?
No, I usually just take my thumb and forefinger and just crush his head.
Yeah.
I think the best bit of pop culture that uses that is Jane, Silent Bob, and Mallrats, where you see Silent Bob with the cigarette, and he's always like trying to move it, and Jane's like, knock it off, knock it off. Fat ass over here thinks he can move cigarettes with his mind, but he's just fooling himself and looking stupid. It's just, yeah, by accident, but yeah. Oh shit, that shit works. Yeah. Use the force, fat ass, use the force.
Exactly. And I don't know how many times I've used this in life, but when someone asks me something, or ask me a question, I'll do the classic, oh, these aren't the droids you're looking for. It's very quotable. So then we scene swipe, and that's the other thing I didn't mention before, but I like how Lucas is able to use some of those classic 30s and 40s like swipes and movements of the camera so that you get the feeling of the change of each scene. And we get a neat little swipe, and we get into the cantina in Mos Eisley with where we're introduced to some rather interesting characters, and in particular, we get to meet Chewbacca. And I thought that it was neat to see more interesting aliens in the in this universe, and we get to see, like, the right hand man for our roguish uh, pilot, Han Solo. And just what were your guys' thoughts on when you first seen this whole scene in the cantina?
This is what you've been waiting for. I mean, this is freaking a sci-fi movie. I mean, you're not just getting a couple little green men or, some alien that's, leaking acid all over the place that has another alien for a tongue. You got like what feels like hundreds and hundreds of aliens in this bar. I know it's not that many, but you feel like there's a ton of them. Although when I first seen it, I was always a little confused. I'm like, why do some of them look like movie monsters, like, werewolf and things like that? Which was because they couldn't get enough masks made quick enough, so they had to use off the shelf stuff that they had at the prop house, and a lot of them were monster masks, and they were supposed to be in the background. And he reworked them to the best of his ability and used them. And a lot of those characters now have backstories, but overall, it was just an amazing amount of aliens, and you're just like, oh, this is what I've waited my whole life for. Like, it's not just one or two; there's hundreds and hundreds of these things, and it's just cool as shit. And then seeing Chewbacca was awesome too. I mean, it's just this giant looking, I don't know, is it a dog? Is it a bear? It's just this big
Walking rug.
It's like if cousin It got really tall and mean, from the Addams Family, kind of. It's just yeah, he was really cool. And one of the funniest things I ever read was, I guess the studio was a little put off because Chewbacca didn't have any clothes. And so, like, hey, do you think maybe you could put some clothes on him, because it's kind of a little indecent for him to be running around naked? And I guess Lucas just looked at him and said, it's all right, he doesn't have a penis. And they're like, oh, okay then. And just settled the whole thing. Like, it just, I don't know why that, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've read it before, and I'm like, that's kind of a funny little story. So, but yeah, I was totally into it. It's awesome. I've forgotten about that one. Yeah, that is funny.
Oh, you're wearing a bandolier. Okay, I guess that flies.
Yeah, well, it's got a big pouch. It covers when it needs to.
Yeah. Or Jawas. Jawas could have came in and just grabbed him again.
Get out of here, you damn dirty droids. We don't want your kind.
I think the last thing I would mention about the cantina is that it definitely gives it that lived in feel to the universe. And it's definitely a throwback to some of those classic westerns with the saloon and the gunslinger kind of hanging out in there. And yeah, it had those kind of archetypes. But again, the biggest thing that it made me feel is that this is a lived in universe. You watch something like Star Trek, it doesn't have that same, like Star Trek, everything has like a polish to it. Whereas with this scene in Star Wars, it's more like gritty, down and dirty. This is how, you would think people in the real world would live, as opposed to being on like a squeaky clean alien planet.
And it's funny that you mentioned the Western aspect of it, because the cantina scene was actually based on a scene from the Western The Searchers with John Wayne. So that was where Lucas got the idea and based it off of that. I don't remember that exact scene. It's been a long time since I watched The Searchers, but yeah, I've always known that was supposedly where that scene came from. And I think you're missing the biggest thing from the cantina, before we walk away, is this is where the biggest controversy happens for this film.
Well, I was going to get to that in my next question.
Right.
So,
yeah, all right, go ahead.
So, we've talked about the different releases of Star Wars, and I just got to ask, since you mentioned that this definitely derived from a scene in a John Wayne movie, I have a big question for you, Tim. Did John Wayne shoot first, or did Greedo shoot first?
Oh shit, John Wayne always shoots first. And so did Han Solo, hands down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so everyone has the big uproar back in '96 when Greedo shot first, and that to me, no matter how you cut it, that changes the character of Han Solo. Han Solo is a roguish captain who will do anything he can to stay alive in this universe, and him shooting first is the whole thing of the key to his character. Anyone else have different thoughts about that?
Well, there's actually well, he could make it as a stormtrooper, so, tried bounty hunting. But there's actually 5 versions of this scene, I mean, throughout the years. So, you start off with 77, Han shoots first, which we all know and love. Then in, 97, then you get Greedo shoots first, which, aggravated everybody. And then in 2011, you get Han and Greedo shoot at the same time to try to rectify that situation. And then uh and then in 2019, they leave the Han and Greedo shoot at the same time. And then I guess for the 4K version, Lucas was still toying with it before he sold off to Disney. And then Greedo taunts Han with the word McClunky before he shoots, like as kind of like a final insult before they try to shoot each other. So uh unfortunately, outside of my version that I have, we're always going to have Han and Greedo shooting at the same time. But I agree, it changes the whole Han character if you don't just have him shoot first. And he's rightfully justified. He's Greedo's like, look, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna shoot you in the head. I'm gonna take the money you say you got for Jabba, and I'm gonna go collect a bounty on you, and my day's gonna be golden. So he's like, he shoots him. The only time I think that the two of them shooting together at the same time kind of works is when Han gets up and walks away. He looks like a man who's trying to hold a turd between his butt. I mean, he's like, he's a guy who just about took a bolt to the head, and he's kind of got that real stiff, like walking out, throws the money on the things, like sorry for the mess, and then leaves kind of thing. And that's the only way I think that scene even works a little bit, is because he's like, holy crap, I almost got my head blown off. So
Right.
that's about the only credence I can give to that whole scene working. Otherwise, I still go with Han shoots first.
Gotcha. Well, I do want to point out that at the time of this recording, we just recently heard, like 2 days ago, that Maria D'Aragon, the actress who played Greedo, passed away at the age of 81. So yeah, not to bring us down, but Han did shoot first, and apparently Maria died first.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
Walrus Man, he doesn't like you. I'll be careful. I don't like you. Doctor, his name is.
Dr.
Oh,
Zaius?
no, it's not Doctor Sayus. Doctor Evazan. That was the name of him. So, and then the other guy was called Walrus Man, at least as far as the action figure was concerned. And then later on, they named him, I think it was Tom Bamba, if I remember correct.
Gotcha. So, great. I lost my train of thought. Part of being middle-aged. No,
Nope,
it
it
did
did
not.
not.
They recorded something with a Jabba character, but it wasn't the slug that we know of today, and it was cut from the movie for time. But yeah, it is interesting that Han now has, quote unquote, the money to pay off his debt to Jabba. I don't want to sound like a purist, but I never really liked that scene. There's a lot of the re-release stuff from '96 that I didn't care for. And again, a lot of it was like, Greedo shooting first, the whole Jabba scene. The fact that some of the CGI just kind of threw it off from the actual physical effects that we got later on in the movies with Jabba, and the physical effects that they used at the time. I've never been a big fan of the '96 re-release. Tim, your thoughts?
Well, I liked the scene. I thought it was probably one of the better things they added in there, honestly. But I mean, the reason he steps on his tail, uh, outside of storytelling, is just because Han Solo walks around the human figure of Jabba in that scene when they're recording it, because they were supposed to put effects in later, and they can't do that without having Jabba's tail in the way. So that's why they really do that, and they cover that up later on in the books, explain that Han's one of his best runners. He really is. He's like, he kind of came up in Jabba's organization, proved himself to be really worthy, and has really brought Jabba a lot of money in. And Jabba, he's like, well, why are you sending bounty hunters after me? He's like, well, I can't. I like you, Han, but I can't not make you the exception to the rule. And so I had to send Greedo after you. So Han's like, come on, man, it's me. You know I'm gonna get you the money and stuff. So I think that's why he gets away with a little of that respect, because he knows he's the moneymaker for Jabba to some extent. He's one of his best moneymakers. And I think Jabba, although he killed Greedo, he's kind of like, all right, well, just give me my damn money and we'll call it good kind of thing. So, because he doesn't, I don't think at that point he really wants to kill Han yet. He hasn't become a thorn in his side. He hasn't really dodged him that long. So that's kind of how I just, basically level it, in my head as how it works. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the classic gangster movies. This is the first time that he hasn't paid his bill. He's got his 30-day warning. Next is his 60-day warning.
This was the breaking of the legs. Yeah. Except
Yeah.
Greedo just got a little zealous.
And then it's not until like the 120-day that he has to get frozen in carbonite. So then Luke sells his speeder, gets some cash for it, makes a comment about what was that? Head THX no.
THX 1138?
No, he rambles off a number for a particular type of speeder that everyone's talking about. He's like, yeah, ever since the such and such came out, I can't get a good price for this.
Yeah, I don't remember that speeder, but that's one of those points that he says that, and that's one of those little details that doesn't need to be in there, but just adds to the movie, I think.
Yeah, as I say, it's a nice little, like, again, a world building line, and then of course Luke and the droids and Obi-Wan show up to the hangar bay where we get to see the Millennium Falcon, which I thought from a design standpoint was a pretty freaking cool ship. I mean, even to today, I think it's probably one of the best. Next to like the Enterprise D, it's like one of my favorite looking ships. It's very iconic. When you see that ship, you know you're in a Star Wars movie. No matter how bad it's written or where it falls, it's a Star Wars movie, which is one of the things that I missed about the prequels, was seeing the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, it's no, go ahead. Yeah, I think in the game it threw me off too, because it's like, that's not how the Corellian ships should be designed. This is kind of their trademark signature, design pieces that they always put off the side. But the game kind of that was the one thing that West End games kind of shattered. Thanks, West End. But I think the thing about the Falcon is it's not just a ship; it's a character all in itself. I mean, the Falcon becomes its own character throughout the series, and that design is much better than the original. That's actually the second design of the Falcon, because the original Falcon was supposed to be the Tatooine 4 that we see at the beginning, Princess Leia's ship. That was the original Falcon, but just before they started production, Space 1999 happened, and that ship looks a lot like Tatooine 4, and they're like, we can't have this because we just can't have something that's going to be from this TV series be our main ship. And so my understanding is they were kind of sitting around working on designs, and I don't know if it was Lucas or somebody, but they were eating a hamburger and they seen that. It was like the hamburger was there, and then there was like I don't know if it was a piece of lettuce hanging off the side or something, and that's kind of where they got the design for the Falcon. It's from this hamburger, which I thought was kind of interesting all in itself too. So it's kind of how it got its trademark characteristics.
Yeah, I say I can't, like I said, I can't picture Star Wars without the Millennium Falcon. I mean, its shape is so iconic. I mean, it even shows up, in other parodies, other science fiction, gags and jokes. It even shows up on the cover of Blade Runner. You have to really look for it, but it's there. Which, if I don't know if you guys are aware of it, with the Blade Runner cover.
No, I'm
Okay, yeah. So if you look at the original movie poster for Blade Runner, you get Harrison Ford's character kind of like over the city, and there's a cityscape, and there's one particular building that is shaped like the Millennium Falcon. And if you look close enough, it looks just like the Millennium Falcon is on top of the building. The building top is shaped like it. So, and that was Ridley Scott's wink and a nod to Han Solo and George Lucas.
nice.
But then, I thought it was red. Hold on. I've seen so many different versions of Blade Runner. Yeah, here, I'll just share my screen with you real quick. This makes great podcast, by the way, for an audio performance. So I don't think this is the same poster I'm thinking of, but this building here originally had like a Millennium Falcon look to it, and it had 2 little extra protrusions that came out. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Millennium Falcon. And of course, we get the scene where the Falcon is just under attack by the stormtroopers because they've been um, alerted to the droid's presence. They were followed by a spy, and then paid off by a stormtrooper. And then the stormtroopers show up and they start shooting at the Millennium Falcon. And Han Solo runs in to the ship in a very heroic way, and then they fly out of Mos Eisley in a very I would compare it to King Arthur yelling "Run away, run away!" for your Monty Python fans. And then they're flying out of Tatooine and they get into space, and suddenly there's that Star Destroyer, and we get that great line of Chewie punch in the yeah, and then they take off to Alderaan.
Flying through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy.
Yeah, we definitely get the explanation of how hyperspace works. Well, it's what's interesting, and I'm gonna go back to the Han Solo movie. We actually learn why the Millennium Falcon is so fast. It's not necessarily the nav computer, but it's the brain powering the nav computer with oh gosh, what was the droid's name that Lando had? Was it L7? But her mind gets like placed inside the nav computer, and now it's actually her brain that's plotting all the courses when they dial in a destination. And that's why the Millennium Falcon is so fast, is because it can navigate so much quicker than any other ship in the galaxy.
It's L3, by the way.
L3, okay, right, because it's faster than it's like a ludicrous kind of speed. They've gone plaid. Sorry, that's a different space story. So then they're hanging out in hyperspace, they're cruising along, and then this is a great time for Luke to practice on some rudimentary skills in lightsaber battling. And we get probably one of my most favorite lines when they're sitting there fighting, or while Luke is sitting there practicing, and that's Han Solo's line of "Hokey religions and ancient weapons. There's no match for a trusty blaster by your side." Which again, I think is a great line that kind of leads more into the character of who Han Solo is. He's one that's not going to believe in this thing called the Force, and that he only believes in what he sees and what he can get away with in this universe. What did you guys think of this whole interaction between the 3 characters of Obi-Wan, Luke, and Han?
I was thinking about that when he's training with that ball. He's like, "Here, put this blast shield on." I'm thinking, he's got that thing in one hand. He's gonna bring his other hand down and just slice all 4 of his fingers off. It's like, and that's it. It's just a game over. They do that Rick and Morty too. Rick gives Morty a lightsaber and he drops it. It's gonna go all the way through to the core of the Earth and destroy the planet. So they have to like intercept it.
Again, we wouldn't have all these really fun pop culture references without this movie. And I think my timing's a little off on this because I think there was also a cut scene in there where we get back to the Death Star and they're interrogating Leia again, and this time, they're on the cusp of Alderaan, and they're asking her for the location of the rebel base, and she says Dantooine, which I didn't find out until much later when I got the Star Wars Monopoly that Dantooine was the twin planet to Tatooine. Yeah. And so what does Grand Moff Tarkin do? Destroys Alderaan.
What? You're far too trusting. Stupid girl.
And then, of course, then we get to the training sequence, and then we cut back again to the Death Star, and Grand Moff Tarkin learns that she was lying, and so then he immediately says, "Okay, execute her immediately." And then, if it wasn't for the fact that the Millennium Falcon comes out of hyperspace at around that moment, and Darth Vader says, "Well, maybe the princess is..." Yeah. So I don't know if it's, again, the Force leading them to the right point. Coincidence that if this didn't happen, the movie would be over and Princess Leia would be dead. So then the Millennium Falcon shows up in the space of Alderaan, and they landed what they thought might have been a asteroid field, and that's when they learned that they're flying through the debris of Alderaan. And of course, part of me is like, man, I wonder if there's like any like, I don't know, bodies or anything, or if it was just completely atomized.
I think it's pretty atomized. I mean, that planet, it exploded. I mean, yeah, it just, I mean, they're not even really in an asteroid field. They're really in like just a gravel field. That's really,
Yeah.
what they're in at that point. So yeah, I'm pretty sure everything got vaporized.
So it's like, how sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After you see the special edition version of it, though, the original one is a little lackluster. You're kind of like, it just looks like somebody blew up like a firework, in front of the planet. The other one's got that cool line coming out and stuff. And yeah, so I gotta say that was a definite improvement. Was the explosion of Alderaan?
Yeah. And and seeing that, it's like you now know how menacing the Empire is, and it was a really cool effect that kind of really sucked you into the movie and showed you how these guys are pure evil, that they're going to destroy an entire innocent planet.
And did you sit and think about it? You're like, all these guys are on this space station. I mean, how many, hundreds of thousands of people there. Guys are down in the gun room. They're like, yeah, we're just going to destroy a planet. They're like, okay. Everybody's just pushing their buttons, doing their job. Like, they're not even giving it a second thought. They're just like, yeah, that's what we do. We blow planets up. Like, yeah, I agree. I agree for sure.
I'm going to have to say maybe for a majority of them, but there's got to be somebody on there that's just basically doing all this because of fear. I mean, Grand Moff Tarkin says it best. Fear will keep them in line. And honestly, I think there might be some people on the space station that are just going through the motions just because they don't want to die.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, because it seems like there's only once you join the Empire, there's really two paths you can take. I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to be dead. Not a
Exactly.
lot in between, right?
So then they discover that there's a TIE fighter that overtakes the Millennium Falcon, and they think, oh shoot, did he get caught up with us? And they're like, no, it's too small to travel through hyperspace. And of course they see that it's heading to that small moon, and again we get another Rebel Moon kind of tie there with, that's no moon, that's a space station. And then they get a little too close because Han's thinking, hey, I can blow away this TIE fighter before they radio us in, and all of a sudden they get caught up in the tractor beam and they get pulled in. Yeah, that, and I have to go back and watch again just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that the phrase "delusions of grandeur" shows up in all the Star Wars movies. But
I will have
it is.
Oh, go ahead, man.
I say I do have to think that it is kind of neat that it's Luke that says that I've got a bad feeling about this.
I was just going to say, Rick, in all the years I've watched this movie, I have never thought about that statement being guided by the Force. That's an interesting take on that statement. I got a bad feeling about this, and it's the Force that's giving him the feeling. So, that interesting take. I like the perspective.
And it would make sense that Luke would be the one to mention it, since he just tapped into the Force in his training exercise. So, yeah, I agree with you, Rick. All right, so Han wants to fight his way out, but Obi-Wan says there's better ways than fighting, and he comes up with a neat little plan, which I'm kind of wondering, did he come up with this plan because he's a great strategist from the Clone Wars, and the fact that they were able to smuggle themselves in the Millennium Falcon when they get taken on board the Death Star? You guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that stems from the Clone Wars. I think that's a pretty good analysis of that. I mean, he is a pretty good tactician throughout the Clone Wars. Not quite as good as Anakin, but good. And then it lends it to its favorite toy feature for me on my Millennium Falcon is the hidden compartment where you could hide your action figures, from the Empire when they board the Millennium Falcons.
And yeah. And then as they smuggle themselves aboard the Millennium Falcon onto the Death Star, um, they send the stormtroopers up to search the ship, and they can't find anything. And so Darth Vader tells them to get a scanning unit to scan the ship. And I think this is where we get probably one of the best jokes in the film, or at least like a off-screen pratfall when you hear them take out the two technicians. I mean, I can't help but feel sorry for these technicians. I mean, they're just showing up to do their job, and they get knocked out. And then Luke and Han, in a quick costume change, get into stormtrooper outfits in order to get to the main office. Right.
Well, but you got to remember the stormtroopers at that point, they don't think that there's anybody in the ship because they said a couple of the escape pods were jettisoned and that the logs show that they escaped by jettisoning the escape pod, so they left the ship or whatever. And the stormtroopers wander around later on, be like, "Oh, is this some kind of drill or something?" Like they're not. This is just common every day. Like oh, here's this derelict. Here's a ship. Let's bring it on. We're gonna kill the crew or whatever because we don't like them or whatever. These guys do this every day. Right? This is nothing new for them. So this is I mean they're blowing up planets and sucking in ships all the time. They don't think twice about it. So and it's the Falcon. I mean in comparison to Star Destroyers and the Death Star, this thing's tiny. I mean, how much of a threat can it be? So they're not taking it seriously. Yeah, and it looks like a piece of crap. So they're not taking this thing seriously at all. And it's not like Darth Vader's be like, "You guys, you need to take this serious." Like this isn't something to mess around with. They're just like, "Oh, this is such bullshit." So those guys, they're just doing their thing. They're this, this is just an average day of a trooper, man.
It is a rather well mentioned, documented serial number in the Star Wars universe.
So you're saying I shouldn't use it as my password then, is what you're telling me.
No, use TK422.
Yeah, that'll get it. Yep.
So yeah, so they managed to Han and Chewie, the droids, Obi-Wan managed to overtake the control room, and then Luke comes up and says, "Man, with all your growling and blasting, surprising that the Empire hasn't found us yet." And we get a nice little tit for tat and conversation between the three of them, and then that's when we learn the plan that Obi-Wan has decided that he's going to shut down the tractor beam so that they can, beat feet and get out of there. So he heads off to go shut down the reactor for the tractor beam, and then that's when R2D2 discovers that she's here, and we learn that Princess Leia is slated for execution, and she's on the Death Star. And we get an interesting take that Luke's definitely wanting to save her, and I'm kind of questioning his motivation. Does he want to save her because he's quote a good guy, or does he want to save her because she's like the first real woman that he's seen?
Yeah, maybe at this point he's just got some delusions of grandeur,
Ha! Nice. And of course he has to convince Han Solo to help him save the princess, and he eventually does. And they come up with an interesting plan of a prisoner transfer, and they have Chewbacca in quote unquote manacles, and it's interesting that it kind of echoes, or I would say foreshadows, what we see in Solo, a Star Wars film, where we learn where Han Solo and Chewbacca first meet. Chewbacca was a prisoner, and you can definitely tell that he did not want to be in chains again. So I thought that was a very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Mirror to the two stories. A tie. That's it. A tie.
Yeah.
One of the things I did like about Han and Luke heading down or up to the detention center when they get to the elevator is the fact that one of the I think it might have been Han, like just kind of like pointing, like you want to come into the elevator with us.
No, he's not doing that. He's actually they get in the elevator. That guy's about to get on, and he looks at him. He points to Chewbacca, and he kind of swats him away. He's like, you can't get on, dude. We're transporting a prisoner. You see this thing? You don't want on. You don't want no part of this. So he's trying to keep him off the elevator. That was my take.
Okay. Here, I thought he was. I thought he was holding the door open and seeing if anybody wanted to come in with them. But yeah, I could be. Again, I could be. Reading the scene wrong.
I might have watched it a couple more times than you, Matt.
So, so we wind up in the detention center, and we get this whole shootout scene where I thought it was neat that the yell, "Oh no, he's escaped!" And they had this big shootout, and they managed to wipe out everybody at the detention center, and they locked the doors. And unfortunately, the call button was hit, and we get a rather funny conversation between Han Solo and the control room of the detention center. Because everything's fine down here. How are you guys?
I guess they didn't write any dialogue for him on that. They wanted him just to babble his way through that as if he really encountered that situation. So he kind of just had to make that up on the spot. Which that's about how it would go for us. I mean, hell, sometimes we can't even talk that coherent, in this podcast. So yeah.
A coolant leak. I got a coolant leak. You know what? Let me just edit this out.
Yeah, exactly. Although on that scene, I do enjoy the beginning though, where they walk in and the quintessential just Imperial officer is like, "Where are you taking this thing?" I love the attitude. It's so it defines the Imperial mentality on their feeling on alien species, which is what a lot of people don't really know unless you read a lot of the books and stuff. But the Empire had very little tolerance for anything alien. They didn't want any, they were inferior to regular humanoids. So there were very few exceptions, like Grand Admiral Thrawn, that were part of the Empire that were an alien that were allowed in. But mostly, if you were an alien, you were looked down upon. And it's even the Emperor. When he's doing his rise to power, he uses the aliens, and then when he gets to a certain point, where they're like, "Look, we won," he's like, "Great, I'm going to kill you all because I hate every one of you." It's just so, and that carries on throughout the Imperial forces later on, and that whole mentality.
Right. Which again is very much a parallel to the Nazi Party,
Yes.
which is prolific through the entire Star Wars movies. Is that the Empire is imperialism. It is fascism. It's everything bad in the world exhibited in this movie.
Well, and Lucas keeps going back to that. Well, he does it through Indy too. I mean, how do you make Indy's adventures better? Throw in some Nazis.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just the ultimate bad guys. As soon as you see them, everybody hates them, and you're just gonna anything that you do to them, everybody's gonna be like, those guys deserve that. So there's never like, I thought he was a little harsh with that. Nope, those guys deserved it. You're right. Nope. That guy had everything he got everything he had coming to him.
Exactly.
I only wish we could have killed him twice.
Yeah. And as soon as he says that, she like perks up, like, "Oh my goodness, this is real." I gotta say this is definitely a name thing for me too, because I think we finally learned the truth about certain names. So as we all know, Bob is short for Robert. Dick is short for Richard, and Luke is short for Stormtrooper.
Did a dad joke? Aren't you kind of fat for a Stormtrooper?
Yeah. So they're there to rescue the princess, and all of a sudden the Empire, the real Stormtroopers, break in, and there's this battle going on, and our heroes are trapped in this corridor with very little place for cover. And Leia decides that it's time for her to rescue herself. So she grabs Luke's gun and blasts a hole in the ventilation system in the detention center, and then manages to jump down there. And that's when we get a kind of like this small role reversal where she's now saving them. And I thought it was kind of interesting that again, it probably goes back to the whole fact that Carrie Fisher had like this way to give this spunky attitude towards Princess Leia, and I think this definitely pulls off to show that she's not only just a princess, but she's someone willing to get her hands dirty for the right cause.
Yeah, it's definitely. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, they're hermetically sealed. Yeah, and again, this is another that whole scene of them sliding down into the garbage chute or into the garbage compactor definitely goes back to the whole and not and thens but buts. You slide down into the garbage chute, but there's a monster in there. Okay, you survive the monster. It scuttles away, but the walls are closing in. And I thought it was very very a very good way of telling the story, as well as building tension until we get a rescue from oddly enough the droids. For these two characters that are treated so poorly in the movie, they actually are able to save Luke and Han and Leia and Chewbacca. And no matter what C3PO thinks about Chris's his rusty body for not being fast enough, they actually save the day.
Well, and that's one of those moments too, where again, there's so much character development that happens throughout all those scenes, and you get in there, and you have these three people who are desperately thrown together now, and you got Han that's trying to be the leader, you got Luke that's trying to vie for Leia's attention, and Leia's like, "This is the best the world can give me. I got all this Rebel Alliance, and this is all they could send to basically, try to break me out of this Death Star." And they're in this, this situation where it's like, I don't know how we're getting out of this one. I mean, not only do they get away from a massive firefight with stormtroopers to fall into a trash compactor that doesn't seem, first, other than being locked in, it's going to be, it's not a big deal. But there's some weird freaking monster. Like, what's the Empire's like? What would be really good? Let's throw these weird monsters into our trash for no apparent reason. Just in case somebody falls in, they can kill them for us. It was really a weird thing. As a kid, I was fascinated, and I could never figure out why it was in there. And still to this day, I'm not sure, unless it somehow just eats garbage or something. I don't know, but I always thought that was a bit weird. But then the walls come, in there, and you get to see that dynamic of all of them. Like, okay, we got to work, and Han Solo keeps trying to pick her up, and put her on top. Like, get on top. She's like, I am. What do you think I'm trying to do? And they're trying to call for C-3PO to stop it. And then you get that moment where that they're like, you got, they finally get him. They're like, you gotta shut it down. And he's like, and he hears them all screaming when he finally does. Like, oh my god, I've killed them and stuff. And it's another one of those little dialogue moments where it's like, that's what makes this movie so special. Because these people finally come together to work. They're not at odds all of a sudden anymore. Like, look, we just got to work together because we're gonna die. We're going to become pancakes. This is going to be bad, And then you got C-3PO is very concerned that like he let them down and let them die. So I thought that it's a really pivotal moment in the film, I think.
Yeah. I think it's.
I wonder if it's the joke of like the alligators in the sewer. Like some stormtrooper brought that thing back as a pet, and it kept getting bigger, bigger. Guys like, dude, you better flush that down the fucking toilet because you're gonna get your ass killed by Darth Vader if he finds out you got that thing. And now it lives in basically the sewers of the Death Star.
Well, I thought it released Luke when it went through a grate or whatever. So or a gate. I got the impression that was part of the whole trash disposing unit, and that maybe this creature ate all the bioorganic material, and then once it was done, it would go into like this little like cubby hole or something where this quote gate was at, and then that's when you heard the lock, and then the walls would start to come in to destroy all the non-bioorganic material. Yeah. Okay.
Because he asked me, he's like, what happened? He goes, I don't know. That thing just let me go all of a sudden for no reason. And then you hear the gate go, and then all of a sudden the walls start coming together. So the creature gets triggered somehow. There's something that I don't think he triggers that action. I think maybe there's a noise that, or maybe he's got some kind of, I don't know, maybe they put some kind of device inside him that, gives him a little buzz or a jolt or something. He knows, oh, I got to go get my little hole because they're going to crush the shit out of it.
Right. So after the detention block, again, I'm going to go back and reference the laser disc, and right after the detention block is usually a stopping point on the old Laserdisc for me. So there's always this part where, like, after you hear them all screaming and everything, and enjoy, and they ramble off, open all the doors to blah 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 blah, whatever the garbage detention unit is. That's when the screen goes black, and then I have to get up, change my disc, and then when I change that disc, I always know that we're now ramping up to the last third of the movie, the third act, the pivotal point of everything, where we get all the real big excitement. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, this whole movie has been exciting throughout the whole thing, but this is like everything that we're gearing up towards the third act. We're finally getting the hero's conclusion to the story, and yeah, this trash compactor scene is just the pinch point for me when I know that I'm gonna get bombarded with just a great story. Yeah, it's like I said, it's how I experienced Star Wars probably for a good a good portion of my life, and it's something that's been ingrained in my head ever since then. And yeah, it like I said, it hits all the acts, all the beats. Uh, for the breaks. So then they get out of the garbage scow. They've got somewhat wet heads, which, or at least Luke has a wet head for like an eighth of a second. And then they I'm trying to remember, when they come out, did they see the Millennium Falcon through a window? And then that's when Leia says, "Is that your ship?" Right, yeah. Yeah. And then across the ravine, like one section higher, you can see that they're like trying to shoot down at them. And then that's when we get our first kiss of the movie.
And our
Where
Wilhelm screen, the most
yes.
important part, the
What?
only thing that was not that was pretty much from a can, they actually grabbed that from another film. It was the one thing that they did not create for this film was the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah. Oh, there is one other funny part I want to go back to. So Han's like blasting at those guys, and so he starts chasing them, and then he turns the corner. And I know in the original cut there was maybe like 5 or 6 guys, but then in the extended or the reimagined version, there is now like a whole platoon.
Yeah. Which I thought was a nice touch. I enjoyed that. I thought that was a value added to the movie to me.
And so yeah, so they managed to separate, and they meet back up just outside of where the Millennium Falcon is at. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi who managed to shut down the tractor beam at the power reactor, and as he's trying to make his way back to the Millennium Falcon, he runs into his old apprentice, Darth Vader. And after seeing this movie again seeing this movie after watching episodes 1 through 3, you kind of get the feeling that these are 2 old soldiers who are just tired and worn out, because when they're fighting, they definitely seem to be more like Bushido samurai. They can't do all the flips and stuff that like they did when they were younger. And it seems to have more of a feel in this movie now that you've seen them fight in episodes 2 and 3, where they were like flinging those lightsabers around and going all crazy and bending shit up. And here they're just 2 guys just past middle age, past their prime, fighting each other. And I just think it's kind of neat, the complete different feel to the fights in this movie.
I think we got spoiled with the lightsaber battles that we get to see in the first 3. You know what I mean? When I first seen it as a kid, it was the coolest thing ever. I mean, the lightsabers are awesome. I got to see a lightsaber battle. It was very fulfilling. But yeah, watching it in later years is like, it's exactly what you say. It's the geriatric lightsaber battle of all time, so they're
Yeah.
not moving very quick. Obi-Wan tries to do his one little spin thing that he used to do all the time. And it's like, I think Darth clearly could have got him right there, but he doesn't. But ironically enough, out on YouTube, there is an extended version that somebody did of the lightsaber battle for episode 4, which is really, really cool. I think the guy was called Fixin' It Post or FX it in post. So if you want to go search for that, it's well worth a view. But some guy spent a bunch of time, really drawing it out and making it look cool. Did a nice job with it. So it's the lightsaber battle that you would expect now, knowing what we've seen in the first three. But I agree with you. I think those are a couple of guys. Obi-Wan's obviously way past his prime, and Darth Vader, although a little bit younger than Obi-Wan, getting hacked up. You lose a lot of your Force mojo. That's always been the story, is why Darth Vader tends to get weaker later instead of more powerful. Because when he's Anakin, he had so much more power, and it's because he not only does he go to the dark side, but as he loses limbs and stuff, he can't heal himself anymore and things like that because he's diminished in his Force abilities. So I think that's why he's not any more spry than Obi-Wan at that point.
Gotcha. I like that. Yeah, and again, this movie was looking at archetypes, so it was looking at Japanese, the Kurosawa films where there was samurais fighting, and that was the style that Lucas was going for, and then later on when he did episodes 1, 2, and 3, he kind of let that samurai thought go to the wayside, and he went more with swashbuckling and almost like ninjutsu with the fighting style. So yeah. So Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi are fighting, and they manage to get to a point where Luke can now see the fight, and that's where we get I would say our first messianic symbolism in the movie, in the fact that Darth Vader kills our Obi-Wan Kenobi very much in a kind of sacrificial way. Obi-Wan lets him do it. Now, when I first saw this, I never really, and maybe I'm just reaching here, but I never really noticed the parallels to like Judeo-Christianity. But, Obi-Wan sacrifices himself like Jesus Christ, and he comes back in a ghost form and almost like a Holy Spirit to tell Luke to run. Am I just seeing things, or did anyone else kind of see that same similarity?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm seeing that as much. I mean, I guess I can see it, but I never really thought about it much like that. It's just more lends back to that whole, when Qui-Gon figures out how to come back from the dead through the Force, and Obi-Wan's had years and years and years to really perfect not being a ghost, but like the idea of how you can really maximize that ability, I guess, like once you do go into the Force or whatever. And so I think he's totally prepared for that moment to do so. What, him going back to, it was the Clone Wars, the movie, the Clone
Yeah.
Wars. Yeah. I'm gonna have to say I don't recall how much they had in the Clone Wars. I just remember Yoda at the end of 3 going, look, because it was definitely, I don't think it was in the Clone Wars, because it's in 3 where Yoda's like, one more lesson have I to teach you, Master Qui-Gon, and he's like, so when they're getting ready to go into hiding, he's like, this is what I want you to work on. So it's kind of like his last lesson to Obi-Wan before they depart, and he goes to Dagobah and Obi-Wan goes to Tatooine. I don't know if it was ever really addressed as much in the Clone Wars cartoon. Right. Disney at that point.
Yeah. It's I have to get caught up on the Clone Wars. I haven't watched all of them. I do know though, at the end of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that was on Disney, one of the last shots was Obi-Wan Kenobi finally like sits down and starts to study the lesson that Yoda gave him in episode 3, and we see a shot of Qui-Gon in a ghost form saying, "I've been waiting here for you." So that's the most I know about the Force Ghosts training.
Well, and it throws Darth Vader off because Darth Vader hits him, and I mean, Darth Vader's had his share of, just killing Jedi, obviously, because he hunts them down to the end of the universe. And all of a sudden he, strikes through Obi-Wan, no cut, no Darth Maul cut in half kind of thing happening. It's just just the clothes just empty out and fall to the ground, and so you see Darth Vader like touching it with his feet, like what in the hell, So he's distracted. So I think
Yeah.
he's thrown off by that. He's like, I don't know what just happened, but this ain't right.
Yeah, it is interesting. And of course that gives Luke the distraction he needs in order to shoot the lock on the blast doors after he's like, "No!" And I think that's why Luke couldn't be a stormtrooper, because he's got a crack shot.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
able to take out the bridge controls, and he's able to shoot the lock so that it closes the blast doors in the hangar bay. So
Well, he's better than Greedo. We know that.
yeah.
No, he doesn't
Sorry.
use the Force to keep it in the hangar bay. Was that your question, Rick? Like they tried to do in Obi-Wan? Because does that happen in Obi-Wan where it's not Vader that does that? It's I think it's one of the Sith Inquisitors or something. Don't they try to like keep one of the ships in the hangar bay from getting away?
Well, I know in one of those fan films that Rick was talking about, that one character, that one original character, I think her name was Rey,
Mm.
was using the Force to try to hold that ship in a spot that had Chewbacca, and then somehow she managed to
Yeah.
tap into the dark side and use Force lightning to destroy the ship
Well,
when she
there's your
didn't mean
problem.
to.
Darth Vader was far too trained to have that kind of control over the Force. Powerful you would become.
uh, well, after after shooting the blasters, they're able to get away because Vader wasn't there to hold the ship back, and Obi-Wan was able to shut down the tractor beam. And they take off and they hop into hyperspace, and they head to Yavin 4. But before they can hop into hyperspace, they're being trailed by a bunch of TIE fighters, and that's where we get this really cool. Um, it was paralleled to classic World War II dogfights with those big heavy gunner heavy gunner ships. And I thought it was really neat to see that as they're trying to program the ship to go into light speed, they're firing at these TIE fighters, and you get these really cool quad angle guns, and they're just, they're all excited because they're, using these weapons to get away. And I like how Han Solo shuts down at Luke and saying, "Hey, don't get cocky." Which of course is one of my favorite lines from the parody that they did on Family Guy. "Hey, don't get penisy." Yeah.
It has that World War II ball gunner experience, like if you're on one of those flying fortresses, is what it reminded me of, and I thought it was really cool in that regard. And I have reenacted that scene hundreds of times with my original Millennium Falcon. I just you put my little guy in the seat and shoot the shit out of TIE fighters all day long. So it definitely is cool.
And what I thought was kind of neat in a behind the scenes kind of thing was that Lucas didn't have like any storyboards or animatics to give to the FX guys on how he wanted this to look. He just provided them with old World War II footage of classic dogfights, the two airplanes like flying around shooting each other. And so that's what they used as their animatics.
Yeah, and they had to actually create an entire camera system to make that work. The guy who ran the original Industrial Light and Magic, which was the effects company that Lucas had to create because 20th Century Fox had dissolved their FX, basically their special effects department. So that was why he created Industrial Light and Magic. And they were like, well, we need to figure out a way to basically it was a way of making the camera move along with the model and still make the background move and look all correct. And the guy who ended up running Industrial Light and Magic created that. I cannot think of his name off the top of my head, but he developed that specifically for this film, and it was a game changer. They said if he hadn't created that, then this movie would not been what it would have been, at least as far as the cinematography for the space battles. So pretty impressive stuff to come up with on the fly, especially. And they did again. The guy Lucas or Industrial Light Magic created Photoshop, which is the Adobe program we all know that does all the photo editing. The guy who wrote Rogue One worked for Industrial Light and Magic in the special effects. He wrote that and submitted that script. He's the guy who created Photoshop too. So little ILM trivia there for you.
So yeah, so after the cool gunner scene, the Millennium Falcon takes off into hyperspace, and Leia mentions to Han, they let us go. They're tracking the ship, not this ship, sister. And then they wind up in the Yavin system at Yavin 4, and they manage to get Leia back to the rebels, and Han's able to collect his reward of was it 15,000 credits, and then we learn about the Death Star plans, and again, I another one of those, why didn't they think of it? There's a single exhaust port on the Death Star that if they manage to bullseye and shoot a torpedo down, they could cause a chain reaction. And being a guy who draws CAD drawings for a living, seeing some early AutoCAD program show the animation of all that, I was like, that's really kind of neat.
It cost them a fortune to create that too. It was really expensive for them to create those graphics back in the day. But I agree, it was really, really cool looking.
And then once we get the battle plan, we learn that the Death Star is actually on its way to Yavin 4, where the Empire has decided that they're going to wipe out the Rebel Alliance because they actually did trick the Millennium Falcon, no matter what Han said. And then let's see.
Well, and it worked towards their advantage because they're like, how do we defeat this thing? Not with our fleet, but with a bunch of snub fighters. So how do you get your snub fighters close enough without having to deploy them? Have the thing you want to destroy come to you. It was actually kind of a brilliant plan. They kind of used each other, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. And there's a scene when they're going over the plan that I thought was kind of funny. I'm like, man, Luke's kind of a bit of an arrogant guy. He talks about they talk about the size of the port and how he said it's only 2 meters wide. And the one guy's like, oh man, you can't hit that. And poor Luke's like, oh, you kidding? I used to bullseye womp rats back home. I'm like, what a dick thing to say. You know that?
Yeah, but I think to him no, it's not even that. I mean, think about it. That's the force that Luke's tapping into unknowingly. Like, yeah, he can do that because much like, Anakin was one of the few humans that could actually fly a pod racer. Luke's like, that ain't no big deal. And everybody else is like, fuck that. None of us can do that shit. What are you talking about? That's not real. But to him, he doesn't realize he's tapping into the force and has that ability.
Right. I was actually working my way around to referencing another Family Guy scene from Blue Harvest, and the fact that Luke calls him out, or Luke says that, and then the guy calls him out and says, "Hey man, can you come over here? I want to talk to you." You guys don't remember that part?
I do not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The guy that says it's hard to do, and then Chris says, "Yeah, it's I used to bullseye womp rats back home," and the guy says, "Come over here. I want to talk to you." I felt as though that was a really mean thing to say to me. I don't have your experience. And it's like this long soliloquy on how Chris was being a dick.
Nice.
So, you mentioned Biggs, and other than that scene, I think that's the only scene that was left in the movie, or wasn't cut out of the movie. And one note about Biggs when Luke was talking about going to the academy, when he was talking to Uncle Ben and Aunt Beru, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. Uncle Ben, where'd that come from? I feel so bad because Biggs seemed to have been like a major character in Luke's life that we only get to see maybe 2 minutes of him in the entire movie. Do you guys know anything about this character that was left on the cutting room floor?
Well, I mean,
yeah, that made the cut. But I mean, I know there was other scenes with Biggs, and it seems sad that here's a character that probably could have helped develop Luke's personality a little more, or explain Luke's personality a little more, but yet they left most of his scenes on the cutting room floor. And I know oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Have you watched those scenes? Because they are actually available as deleted scenes on the disc. And to be honest, it belongs on the cutting room floor. It really doesn't add anything more to that. Like, you don't get a lot more out of the big scene with him. It's like him, Biggs, this guy named Fixer, and this girl whose name eludes me right now. I cannot think of her name at all, but it's kind of like them hanging around and just messing around at Tashi's station when he finally does go into town or whatever. And it's them sitting down and Biggs kind of having a little heart to heart with them. And then they see the battle going on up above, which is, what we know to be Tatooine 4 and the Star Destroyer fighting each other and stuff. But overall, I don't think it adds a lot to it. It slows the pace down of the film. It's fun to watch as kind of a deleted scene, but I think adding Biggs in to the hangar scene, because that scene with Biggs in the hangar is not in the original one. So that was a cut scene that made it back into it, and that establishes the friendship between Luke and Biggs, because you hear him talk about, oh well, that's what Biggs said or whatever, and then you finally get to meet Biggs in the hangar, and then you see him in the X-wing later when they're going through the trench run, which is the first time you see him in the original version.
Right.
So I think that helped tie it together pretty effectively. But had you put the other one in, I think it would have just slowed the whole pacing of the show down.
Gotcha. Cool. And then so then we get the big scene where Luke and the rest of the rebels take off to go fight and destroy the Death Star. And of course, they take several runs at it. It's probably some of the best space battle scene you will ever see in any sci-fi movie. Hands down. I don't know if you guys have anything that you want to add to that statement. If you want to break down each individual, dogfight, or what input do you guys want to put in for this? I mean, it's one of those things you have to see to truly understand and experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, it's awesome to see the runs and everything, and as the cameras, I'm actually more fascinated from the actual cinematography, aspect of it, like the way they use the cameras, go over the models and stuff, and to show the trench runs and stuff, because there was a lot of detail there. I mean, if you think about it, that trench run was pretty long that they filmed on, and there was a lot of little guns and things going on, a lot of detail on the surface. I mean, that's a pretty big model that they shot off of, and pretty impressive how they pulled that off and made it look really good. But I mean, from just a movie perspective, it's just a great scene. There's a lot of tension. You get to see several runs, some failures at it, so I think it really helps sell the desperation, and you get to keep seeing that, like, the rebel base will be in range within so many minutes. They keep clocking that down, and another run goes in and fails. Now it's only like 2 minutes away, and another run goes in. It'll be within range 30 seconds. So I think the whole scene as a whole, just it adds a lot of tension and really kind of becomes a nail biter. Like, are these guys gonna be able to pull this off? Well, and if I remember right, there's actually some cut scene of that. So Luke actually gets 2 runs at it originally, and he does one with the computer, and then the second time always one's like, trust your feelings, and then he turns the computer off and does it. And they cut that off for timing and stuff, which was probably the better choice. But that would have lent even more credence to the Force, where it's like, look, no computer's going to make this shot, but somebody with the Force, they're going to pull this off, but either way, you still get that, I think, because he turns the computer off and makes the shot. So I think you get the gist, because the first guy missed, because you're right, of how hard they're like, this is going to be like a really hard shot to make. And he's like, nah, I went high, it didn't go in or whatever. So, but I thought that was interesting to find out there was actually 2 runs with Luke originally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're saying then that Han's heart grew 3 sizes too big?
Yeah, pretty much. That day, Han's heart grew 3 sizes too big. And not to mention, Wookiee gave him some pretty shitty looks too, when he's like, we're leaving, kid, and he's like, well, take care of yourself. And he turns to Chewbacca, he's like, I know what I'm doing. He's just like nobody wants to give him any slack at all. Chew's like, well, I'm not really going to say anything, but you know what I'm thinking. And he's like, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, it was a great moment in character development. You're right, though. It's just, all the stars align, everything's perfect.
And then, of course, we get to the final scene, which was actually shot first. The medal ceremony, and not until the very last movie did Chewbacca ever get a medal?
Well, Lucas has explanation for that. So, according to Lucas, the reason Chewbacca did not get a medal was because Wookiees don't really care about them. They don't really cherish them. They don't mean anything to them. So, supposedly, the Rebel Alliance sends a contingent to Kashyyyk to like the elders to convey their gratitude and kind of have a celebration in Chewbacca's name because he was a participant in destroying the Death Star. That's the word on the street anyway. Now I don't know how true that is, but that was Lucas's way of covering it.
Nice. So yeah, that's the entire story of Star Wars as told from Middle Age Movie Reviews podcast. So obviously we covered quite a bit of stuff. Is there anything, guys, that you want to touch on that we did not cover? I know we talked about some of the effects and some of the production, but is there anything that really stands out that you guys really want to dive into?
I mean, outside of the movie itself, I mean, the only other big thing I really think there is to talk about is just not only did this become a phenomenon as a movie, it really showed how a good soundtrack can improve a movie. It brought special effects, to a forefront that had never been there before. New technologies, new ways of doing it. Sound design really became a big thing. No longer are you just going to go grab a couple canned sound effects. But then there's just the merchandising. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, Lucas made like $10 billion on this movie, I think overall over the years. And it made like another 30 billion in the merchandising alone. Which is what makes him like the richest, director ever. I mean, think about that. Like he made, that much more just in the merchandising because he made that brilliant movie where he's like, they wanted to kind of pay him, I don't remember what it was. They paid him like $150,000 or something to do it. And he's like, that's fine. He goes, but I want to be able to retain all the characters and the likenesses and the rights to do the sequels and stuff. And like, yeah, whatever. Because none of that ever amounts to anything. And it was the most brilliant move ever. I mean, the guy just in the action figures alone. I mean, and they couldn't even get them pumped out by time, 1977, there were no action figures yet. The only thing you could get at Christmas time was an early bird kit that they promised they would send you somewhere between June or January and July, a box of 4 figures, which would have Chewie, Leia, R2D2, and I don't remember who the last character was. It was, Princess Leia. So, but they were pumping out all kinds of other stuff. I mean, there were puzzles, there were Topps trading cards, there was Burger King glasses you could go get, there was cookie jars, soap, shampoos, costumes for Halloween. I mean, just everything. They were licensing anything they could put a Star Wars sticker on. I'm surprised there weren't Star Wars tires, like, come get your at the Michelin dealer and stuff. But it's just an amazing merchandising machine that nobody had ever seen the likes of. And it changed the way that movies, after that were, definitely not promoted, but negotiated, because nobody was ever going to make that mistake twice. Well, and it goes generational too, because, the Star Wars that I had as a kid is not the Star Wars that my son latched onto, because what did he grow up with? He grew up with the prequels. So his favorite stuff was not Luke and Leia and Stormtroopers. It was the battle droids and the super battle droids and, and the clone troopers and stuff like that was his Star Wars, and that's what he really gravitated towards. And not so much, he liked the figures. I mean, because I have a whole toy kingdom down here of just about every Star Wars toy you could ever want, but he really liked the Legos because the Legos, of course, they eventually started licensing into the Lego world. And that was really his world to play in, was the Legos, because then now he could build ships and he could, build armies. Like it wasn't just like, oh, I have 1 or 2 stormtroopers that's going to represent the entire empire. When I was a kid, now I could go and buy him handfuls of these, battle droids and stuff, and he could have large scale army wars with them and stuff, which was, he thought it was the greatest thing ever. So it's interesting to see. Yeah, the video games, the video games brought in different things too, and it tied in books and stuff like that, and expanded out. It showed people that there was a bigger universe than just the movies, and they started learning about, the Force Unleashed or Republic Commando or Battlefront, and there was Shadows of the Empire, which is the book that falls between Empire and Jedi, which they actually launched for that when they launched a video game, a full novelization, action figures for it and everything. So they really try to tie in the books for that too. So yeah, it made the world much larger. And if you didn't like that, you had comic books. You could go read the comics on it and stuff. And if you didn't want to do that, well, hell, you can go buy a lightsaber and be a Jedi, or you can go buy stormtrooper armor. Like you couldn't get that when I was a kid. There was nowhere you were going to get full storm. People printing off entire armors, stormtroopers, clone troopers. I seen a really good General Grievous one year, like some guy created and stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's people, and there's some, and they'll even go further than that. Some of those guys I've seen. There was this one character in Shadows of the Empire called Prince Zizor. That's a big alien, and somebody custom made an entire rubber suit like mask for this character. Like it was, the only one that he made, but it looked fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it goes out in so many different directions on how you want to, celebrate and immerse yourself in the movie.
Well, that brings me to a question for you guys, and this might I don't know, this might be food for thought. So, Lucas did a great job with the this is the marketing campaign, but with the merchandising, and then people picked up on it. Merchandising expanded and expanded, and it tapped into that ability to continue the Star Wars stories with kids of all ages, and it exploded to where it's at now. Do you think, or do you feel that with Disney taking over Star Wars and expanding the universe even more, that we've now become oversaturated with the Star Wars market?
Right.
I agree, and you can break it down a little bit with the newer content Disney's done. Mandalorian, awesome. People flock to it. They love it. Obi-Wan, horribly executed, just crappy. Boba Fett, horrible, crappy. Andor, pretty good. You know what I mean? So it's hit or miss with them, but when they do it right, people are really drawn to it. And then those ones that people are drawn to are the ones that they're still kind of making figures for. But even in its heyday, like, I mean, if you think about it, starting with episode, I even start with episode 1, they relaunched the original 3 movies as a special editions, started making figures, and it went well. And then they created 1, 2, and 3. And I mean, there were times like you'd have, like for 1 and 2 especially, you would go in, and the day the movie launched, they dropped those toys, and you'd have an entire aisle, both sides full of that stuff.
Right.
Because they were great movies. And that led straight into 1, 2, 3, the Clone Wars. I mean, the Clone Wars went on forever, and people bought it. But as the quality went down and the writing started to veer off for the legacy stuff to the new Disney version of it, the fans were like, no, I'm not having it. This is not Star Wars. This is not what it's about. And now you can't really find a Star Wars toy on a shelf because they're putting out crap, so nobody wants to buy it. I don't. I mean, you guys know me. I'm the hugest Star Wars fan. I've been collecting since I was 7. And I'm done. I don't buy anything new from Star Wars anymore now. I'm only buying pieces to fill in my old collection, and I'm done because they're just putting out crap. I mean, every once in a while they'll put out something kind of neat, but that's with HasLab. That's a whole nother conversation, and I can't afford that crap. So they're like $500 a crack. So there's a certain point where I have to be like, I can't justify this, this kind of purchase for a toy. But yeah, I'm done with it because the stories are bad, and I don't want to even have that stuff on my shelves. I don't care to even have it be part of my Star Wars universe. It ended pretty much about it, The Mandalorian for me, and that's where it's done. Except for I gave Andor a try per Rick's recommendation, and I was ready to write it off, and it actually turned out to be pretty good. And I think the only other one I'll even give some kudos to is probably Bad Batch, because it's kind of goes along with the Clone Wars.
Yes, it's a Clone Wars sequel.
Yeah, more or less. Spin-off. It feels like Star Wars still.
Right, well, I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on, and we kind of briefly mentioned it every once in a while, and that's the music. Star Wars. We talked about the opening crawl. We talked about the fanfare and how John Williams, went with the same key and kind of has the Star Wars theme tie into that whole feel. But just every song, every symphonic note is so ingrained in our pop culture that even today when you hear the Emperor's March, you think of Darth Vader. When you hear the medal ceremony sequence with the song, it pops in your head. It takes you back to those scenes in the movie. It is John Williams' score is just part of our culture now. Um, and it's phenomenal. This is probably the biggest movie that put his name on the map. Um, Aside from like Jaws and Superman.
Right. Well, and that's how we got here. Honestly, Lucas originally didn't plan on having an original score. He was just going to put classical music to this thing. And Steven Spielberg watching, he's like, dude, you're insane. You've made one of the most original films ever. You need to have an original score that's going to meet the expectations of this film. And he's like, let me introduce you to John Williams. I just worked with him on Jaws. So we can thank Steven Spielberg for all this great music that we get from Star Wars, because if he hadn't done that, we would not have it today.
How about you, Rick? Anything on
Composer.
Right? Yeah, I think the word you're looking for is experience. It's definitely an experience for you when watching this movie with John Williams music. So, well, I wanna say I think it's pretty stupid for us to do a death clock on it, because I think we're all pretty much unanimous that it's worth the 2 hours and 1 minute, unless someone has another thing to say about why they shouldn't watch this movie.
No, I think we're all in agreement. This has just been one very long love fest for this movie. I think that's very apparent. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us this long during the Star Wars podcast.